Today I'm sitting down with Eric Wargo. He's an anthropologist and science writer, but that's not why he's here. Eric has spent the last decade researching one of the most taboo ideas in science, the possibility that the future can influence the present.
Taboo? I've been saying this for years. Every time I get married, I get the feeling it's a bad idea. Then boom.
This isn't time travel in the sci-fi sense, something more profound. He calls it precognition, and he argues it's grounded in Einstein's black universe.
Black universe sounds like where the lizard people keep the good timeline locked up.
The evidence comes from quantum physics experiments, lab studies that seem to prove retrocausation, dreams that come true years later, artists who paint disasters before they happen.
Well, every year I dream I'm gonna get audited by the IRS. Then boom.
Eric has 5 books on the subject. His work bridges hard science and consciousness research, and this conversation gets out there. We talk about time loops, precognitive dreams, the science of synchronicity, and how the future might be pulling us towards specific outcomes. I think you're gonna like this one. Let's go down to the basement. Dr. Wargo, welcome to the basement. I'm excited. I'm excited for this.
I'm excited too.
Before we get started, tell me why on God's green and glorious earth would anyone own a monitor lizard? Why?
My oldest daughter, Emily, is really into reptiles and lizards, and she has been wanting, she watched all the reptile influencer videos on YouTube and just really wanted this certain kind of monitor lizard. And initially it was like, yeah, we'll get you one when you're 13. We'll get you one when you're 13. And then, but it never went away. And then, you know what? I kind of started wanting one too.
What? Really?
Yeah. Monitor lizards are the coolest. When I was a kid, monitor lizards were just the coolest animals on earth. Komodo dragons are the monitor lizards, And, so, my father-in-law said he'd help out, financing the vivarium. So last April we got a baby spiny-tailed monitor lizard, and he's grown into a lovely, 2-foot long little creature that we love dearly. It's been a wild, very interesting experience learning about, reptile husbandry and having a pet in my life, in our lives, that is not a typical pet. We have cats, and of course I love my cats, but I grew up with dogs, but reptiles are very different.
What's his name?
His name is Sunflower.
Okay, she named him.
She named him.
Are you feeding like live mice or
live insects?
Live insects.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But he is delightful. He's delightful. They're very intelligent in their own way. They're not, it's not the same as like a mammal, but he's very chill. We handle him and pet him and
does he walk around the house?
No.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the difficulty with lizards, and especially monitor lizards, is they require very high temperatures. So he has, he has like a basking rock that's like 110 degrees and very bright lights in his enclosure. But no, he's awesome. And and they're fascinating. It's just fascinating to bond with another kind of animal. It's fascinating enough to bond with a cat or any other kind of mammal, but to develop a bond with a reptile is really, it's another level if you're an animal person, which everyone in my family were all animal people.
Same. So it recognizes.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh sure. Yeah. No, he totally trusts. It takes a lot longer to develop that bond. It took a few months, to get him comfortable with us and comfortable with us being around him, first of all, and then eventually handling him and so on. It's not like a kitten or something like that. But no, he's great, and he looks forward to seeing me every morning when I go in.
Greeting you at the door.
Yeah, yeah. No, he's really cool. Yeah, so I'm glad you asked about that. Yeah. So
how long does Sunflower live?
He's going. Well, knock on wood,
Yep.
he could live as long as 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and we're hoping that he will, because he's awesome.
I've had birds, so I guess it's kind of the
Really?
same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't expect them to recognize you, but my little Maxie, he definitely did.
Well, birds are incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
I mean, they're mammal level intelligence, and that doesn't surprise me. What kind of bird is it?
He was a cockatiel.
Cockatiel.
He's a while ago. Because I have cats now, and they wouldn't do well with a cockatiel.
Right.
I've thought about like an African gray, but
Yeah.
they live so long that it would outlive me.
Right.
So you have to will your pet to somebody.
Right.
You don't want to be on the receiving end of that.
Right. Totally. No, well, I highly recommend monitor lizards. They're very, 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 very cool.
I feel bad for her roommate in college, wherever she goes.
Well, I kind of suspect
Dad'll
be, but that's, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We've still got 8 years or so till that happens.
Right. Speaking of college, so your PhD is in cultural anthropology.
Yes.
And then you moved into more psychology. So can you tell us about your background, your parents?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I grew up, my parents were psychologists growing up. And then when I studied anthropology, I really sort of studied psychological anthropology. So I got a real basis in psychological theory and psychoanalysis and so on. And after I got my degree finally, after a long time that I don't even want to talk about or remember, I was not suited to academia, so I did what everyone who has a degree and can't be an academic does, which is become an editor and writer.
Sure.
And Washington, D.C. is where those people congregate, because it's full of nonprofits and scientific organizations and the government and people who are hiring editors and writers who are smart and have a lot of too much education and no real world experience, and so so they work directly or indirectly for the government or for the nonprofit world.
What is it like to grow up with two psychologists as parents? That sounds difficult.
Yeah, I don't recommend it.
Okay. I mean, there's got to be advantages, like you've got a problem, you can talk to mom and dad and really get to the root of it. Oh no, I'm wrong.
Or not. Yeah, no, I should say my dad was a psychologist. My mom had a master's in psychology, but she didn't work in the field. But my father was more of a scientific psychologist. He wasn't seeing patients and stuff like that. But then that sort of was a natural basis for me to work for a psychology organization in Washington, D.C. So for many years, I was an editor and then editorial director of one of the two big psychology scientific societies in the United States, both of which are based in Washington, D.C. And indirectly, that job is part of actually my backstory that led me to doing the work I do, even though the work I do would be completely rejected by my former colleagues.
They don't like this.
They do not like this stuff. They are the most hot. I mean, studies have even been done on sort of the degree of hostility towards parapsychology of different academic fields, and psychologists are number one. They, for them, anything smacking of ESP or parapsychology is, they have a chapter on pseudoscience at the end of their Psych 101 textbooks, and they'll put parapsychology in that.
I remember it. I remember that from my own studies. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's real. I mean, that we can talk about this, but the extreme prejudice toward parapsychology really came to disturb me when I saw it firsthand. And this was around the time that I was learning about, I grew up with that kind of knee-jerk assumption that ESP is a myth. But after I had my UFO sighting, which we can talk about,
sure.
I was reading, Jacques Vallée, and he's talking about psychic phenomena and like they're real. And here's this smart guy, taking this subject seriously, and I felt, well, I need to do my due diligence here and read up on it. And that was the huge paradigm shift for me. That was the huge ontological shock. I didn't have any problem with UFOs, but I had a huge problem with the existence of anything like ESP. But I realized, I was reading, it was around this time that Daryl Bem's prominent research, we can talk about that too,
Sure.
Came out, his Feeling the Future studies, which I was like, what? I don't know if I can swear on your show.
Sure.
What the fuck is going on here?
We're going to say that a lot today, I think.
Okay, excellent. And then I realized, I've had those dreams. I've had precognitive dreams. I'd had a dream about 9/11 on the morning before 9/11.
Well,
and I had just swept it under the rug. That's what you do when you don't have a mental box or a cultural box to put an experience in. It really just leaves your head. You just like, well, there's no place for this experience to live, and it just goes away. So people, often find that, like, God, I've been having these experiences, but I just didn't even think about them. And that was true for me too. I'd been having precognitive dreams, and I just, because of my beliefs, my belief system, my unexamined belief system, I just didn't let it trouble me. But, I found that I had to do that. But my colleagues, when Daryl Bem's paper came out, which was in 2011, my colleagues it was about to be published. A manuscript draft of it came across my desk because it was about to be published by our rival psychological society. I won't use the names of the societies, but and my colleagues were considering writing an angry letter to
the journals?
To the journals, saying this is preposterous and should never be published. It makes the field look bad, blah, 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 blah. And that just seems so unscientific to me.
It's a theme that comes up over and over on this show when I speak to scientists, is scientific hostility from the scientific community.
Right.
Well, we'll get into the details of Bem's work, which is amazing. Take us to the UFO sighting. And, in full disclosure, I asked you a few questions before we came in here, what you'd be comfortable talking about. I wasn't sure you'd be okay with the UFO story, so I was excited that you would be, because some people are embarrassed by it. Okay.
Sure. Well, in my case, it wasn't anything up close and personal, and it wasn't a close encounter. I mean, it would be a close encounter of the first kind. It was a sighting of two orbs sort of dancing with each other and moving across the sky. This was in Philly on July 4th, 2009, and my then girlfriend and I were camped out. I don't know if you know Philly at all, but in front of the art museum, my favorite art museum, there's a long sort of greenbelt kind of area, and I was camped out with a bunch of, there was just like lots of people there gathering, waiting for the fireworks to start. The fireworks don't start in Philly until sort of later in the evening, unlike a lot of cities. So we were camped out there, and there was a Sheryl Crow was playing on the steps of the art museum. We couldn't see her, but we could hear the Sheryl Crow concert. Sheryl Crow, who turns out is really into UFOs. I didn't even know that at the time.
Did she see these orbs?
I have no idea.
Because these were seen, yes, by others.
They were seen by others, yeah. Because so anyway, I see this thing. I show my girlfriend, and I had one of those flip cams that they were selling for a couple of years back around then, and I tried to film it. Nothing came out on the film, but it was far away and the light was bad. But anyway, it definitely wasn't a firework, definitely wasn't Chinese lanterns. It wasn't anything like that. And I've seen tons of satellites in my life. I know what satellites and everything else, what that stuff looks like. It was not anything like that, but it was like, wow, that was weird. And then the next day I got on to MUFON, I guess it must have been MUFON, and found that there had been other reports of the same thing.
Were you a UFO guy at that point? Or?
I wasn't. I mean, okay. I've always sort of in the back of my mind been interested in the subject, but I never, until then, I had no idea that there were serious people actually studying it scientifically and so on. I didn't know who Jacques Vallée was and all that. But anyway, when I saw that there had been other reports of the same thing in eastern Pennsylvania on the same night, I thought, okay, well, I'll make my report to MUFON. And so a MUFON guy called me, and I made my report. So the encounter itself was not spectacular, but it was enough to get me to start reading. And so, as one does, one reads, I was reading Richard Dolan's books and Jacques Vallée's books.
And you're like, these guys are actually really smart.
These guys are actually really smart, and this is really compelling. And I had a blog at that point that I was writing about science fiction films and stuff like that. But I started writing blog posts, and at the time I assumed it was extraterrestrials, and so I was all having fun with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. But the fact that this topic dovetails with parapsychology in so many ways, and the fact that you had really smart people like Jacques Vallée talking about psychic phenomena that occur often in conjunction with UFO encounters, that was the, I guess when people use the word ontological shock, I mean, it wasn't a all at once shock, but it was a kind of a gradual paradigm shift for me to first countenance the idea that, well, maybe psychic phenomena are real. Maybe these things really happen. And then, gradually realizing, well, I have these experiences. I have precognitive experiences and so on. And
did you run this by mom and dad?
No.
Okay.
No.
Ever?
No.
Okay.
No, actually my father passed away that year. Actually, that's kind of an interesting aspect of this experience, because this happened in July 2009. My father had cancer at that point, and he passed away that September or October. And in fact, like a lot of life upheavals happened. My girlfriend broke up with me, and that September, my father passed away. A lot of real heavy stuff. And to deal with my father's passing, he had gotten into oil painting after he had retired, and he had all these oil paints and equipment, and easels, and he's the kind of hobbyist who buys every possible piece of equipment for their hobby, and in most cases doesn't even wind up doing it. But I
know that guy.
Yeah, you know that guy.
I do.
I'm kind of that guy too.
Me too.
Yeah, but anyway, so he had all this great oil painting stuff, and I had never been a painter, but I thought, well, I'm going to take all this stuff back to Washington, D.C. And so I wound up spending about 6 months getting really into oil painting and painting these gigantic paintings of UFOs, which are still now in my house. And so that was kind of my way of working through a lot of issues, was just diving into art. But yeah, it was a very painful year in a lot of ways. But
that emotion probably makes sense for your story, yes?
It does make sense. And working through it via art is something, it's something I write about in my book From Nowhere, that, there's it's funny the way UFOs and paranormal experiences, it often inspires people to do art.
Yes.
And they work through it that way. It's just like in Close Encounters, he has a UFO encounter.
Of course.
And he, builds a sculpture in his living room, and you could,
Jacques Vallée is one of the characters in that movie.
Yeah. And you could remove the UFOs from the story completely, and you could make it a story about a male midlife crisis.
Yes, you could.
A male midlife crisis, suddenly, ambivalent about his family and needing to work through these visions that are coming and create art about it, and bond with other people who are on that same journey. But yeah, and so it's interesting that my UFO sighting was directly over the Philly Art Museum, which in fact, some of the important works of art that I talk about in my writing are in that museum. It's my favorite art museum, bar none.
Did you seek out other experiencers or mutual support or anything like that?
Not at that time, no. I mean, It wasn't the kind of thing where I needed support. I wasn't, again, it was not an up close and personal kind of thing. I was not abducted. I was not, it was not an ontological shock for me to see a UFO. It was just really cool.
Yeah.
But it got me then to do the reading. But no, so I didn't talk to other experiencers at that point.
Well, we talked earlier about how history will probably be very kind to Jacques Vallée about his prescience on the subject. What was it about his writing that made you go, okay, this is something different?
Well, he is a brilliant thinker and a very nuanced, subtle thinker.
His background is bananas with
yeah, but but the thing is, what's more interesting to me than even his scientific background is his interest in Hermeticism and alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
Because that actually, I had gotten really interested in alchemy in the 1990s. I lived for a couple of years in Prague in the middle of the 1990s. There was a lot of American expats living in Prague. And Prague was sort of the capital of Renaissance alchemy. And they were kind of in the city, they were kind of, there was a conference of alchemists and an academic conference on alchemists. And there was a big museum exhibition of Rudolph II, who was the emperor who sort of he was the patron of alchemy and all that.
Sure.
So this was sort of fermenting at the time when I was living there. And I didn't know anything about alchemy before I lived in Prague, but that experience living there and talking to some of the scholars who came for that conference got me really turned on to alchemy. So for many years, around the end of the 90s and beginning of the 2000s, I was really interested in Renaissance alchemy and Hermetic thought. And Jacques Vallée is very much grounded in that Hermetic philosophical tradition. And that's what makes him so fascinating. I mean, he's like, on the one hand, he's a scientist, but he's so much more than that. And
I think I have the emerald tablet behind me.
Do you?
Yeah, there it is back there on the wall.
Oh, awesome. The fact that he brought so many multidisciplinary influences to his work was really appealing to me, and he wasn't just a smart guy. I mean, he wasn't just a smart, like Richard Dolan, like fantastic researcher, just like, this is fantastic. He's an actual bona fide historian doing real research. But Jacques Vallée was bringing all these different influences to his thinking. And I really...
He's a venture capitalist for 15 years.
There's that.
So strange.
It's like, yeah. So just so many angles to his thinking. And he became, I really, I still have a shelf of all of his books, and which I've read and reread.
So what specific thoughts, what specific ideas does Jacques have about connecting psychic phenomena to UFOs that attracted you?
Well, it wasn't, I don't agree with everything Jacques Vallée says. In fact, I've kind of come to sort of disagree with a lot of his basic ideas, which doesn't matter.
Nope.
I just respect him as a thinker and as someone who is thinking way outside the box. So, first of all, just saying, look, extraterrestrial, put that thought aside for a while, and think about the other dimensions of this phenomenon that don't fit that box. I mean, that was very important for me. It's like, oh, duh, yeah, this doesn't seem like aliens visiting us from outer space. This is something very different. And his, showing that the phenomenon goes back to the dawn of history was very important. And his attempts to think about this in terms of human consciousness and human society and culture, and the idea of UFOs as a control system, I think was a very interesting, my favorite book of Jacques is The Invisible College.
Mm-hmm.
I've got like a first edition that I found.
Ooh.
Yes, treasured.
That's right. You're a vinyl collector, aren't you?
I'm a vinyl and a book collector. I've got a very sizable library. Vinyl's too expensive, honestly.
It is.
That was a few years, and then I thought, okay, I can't do this anymore. But books, I continue to buy many, many books. I think I keep eBay in business.
Same. Do you think we're seeing more of we see a lot of orbs. Are we seeing more nowadays than we did? Like, because you see them showing up in Renaissance paintings even before. Yeah. Are we seeing more now, or has it always been? It's
hard to tell what's an effect of the internet and what's an effect of, the culture around UFOs that sort of makes people notice them. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. My sense is that these orbs have been around from the start. What are they? I don't discount the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I think that honestly, I assume that the universe is teeming with civilizations, many way more advanced than ours, who would naturally send out automated probes and technology to monitor everything going on in the universe. I think we're living in a surveillance universe.
Sure.
I think we are being surveyed and always have been. There have been orbs floating around our planet since before there were humans, probably. Just keeping tabs on things and who knows, nudging things or whatever. So my assumption, is that there's that. But does that account for the whole of the UFO phenomenon? I tend to doubt that.
It doesn't feel like it. And something I want to talk to you a little bit later in the show is, for my brain, it's easier for me to reconcile that this is more of a local phenomena, that crossing these vast distances, I just can't get my mind to wrap around that these societies they've broken the light speed barrier and they're here. It's easy for me to comprehend that this is a local phenomenon, that it's based on consciousness or it's multidimensional or something like that.
Yeah. And time travel. I am fully on board with Mike Masters' thesis that time travel could be a part of it.
Sure. So Mike Masters, anthropologist,
the
Greys are.
He says that he's looking at it. He's a physical anthropologist, and he's looking at it more from the standpoint of morphology of Greys. That for all kinds of reasons, they look like what we might evolve into. I'm less persuaded by that argument. I mean, he's of the school of thought that extraterrestrials are going to look like everything. They're not going to be humanoid. I kind of disagree with that. I think that convergent evolution is going to result in humanoids everywhere. And
so that's the Copernican principle. That's interesting. That life, no matter where it evolves, is going to take sort of the same course.
Same course, okay. Yeah. Not life, but civilization.
Sure.
Technology using cultural beings. They're going to have taken a certain path to get where they are, and that path is going to take them through bipedalism and having something like hands and a head on the top of a vertical body. I think that's my money would be that the universe will be full of humanoids. So that part I don't necessarily agree with Mike on, but the reality of time travel, the fact that it is technologically going to be possible. And if it's going to be possible, then it already exists.
Right.
I think there are all kinds of reasons that hypothesis should be front and center.
Well, let me pick your anthropology brain for a second, because you just made me think of something I hadn't considered. So if humanoids are going to evolve everywhere, does that mean primates would evolve everywhere?
Something like that. Some proto-primate species. Yeah.
That's interesting. So then you have to just keep going back through evolution then. So then mammals or some type of mammal would evolve everywhere. Or are we talking, I hate to even say the word reptilian, but a reptilian humanoid?
There's the idea that had mammals not taken over the Earth after the Chicxulub meteor, that reptiles would have potentially evolved an upright,
sure,
humanoid-like, intelligent.
It's one of my favorite sci-fi tropes. Is like the saurian race.
Of course. And there was I'm trying to think if he was an anthropologist. Dougal Dixon wrote some books in the 80s. Sort of projecting. What would what would these alternative evolutionary
I'm going to have to write him down, Dixon.
I think I'm getting that right as far as, but I know that there's a sculpture of a sort of a reptilian humanoid that's sort of a hypothetical reptile.
I smile too when I talk about it, but there's 10% of my audience that's screaming at us right now that the reptilians, this is totally real. It's definitely real.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, I know I'm starting to take, David Icke,
some interesting theories.
And he's been proven right.
Yeah.
We're now seeing that, oh my God, he was right about a lot of stuff.
He was.
And
it's just the presentation that's off-putting.
It's the presentation, and then there's the reptilians idea. It's like, I have trouble with that. But whatever. At this point in my life, I'm not rejecting anything. This is definitely a time of ontological shock in a lot of ways. Political ontological shock and.
What you read on the disclosure narrative, is this a psyop? Are we being prepared? I know we're speculating. I just kind of want your thoughts.
I don't know. You could ask me the same question every day and I'd tell you something different because I flip flop. I don't know. I mean, I think there's definitely psyops going on. I mean, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. A lot of disinformation. I tend to agree that, it seems like, there's obviously really a there, but that it's being obfuscated by, interests in the military industrial complex who don't want it disclosed for various reasons. And so they're running all this interference. And then there's people who want it disclosed, but very few people, maybe those 10 people that James Fox talks about know the full picture, and everyone else is they're playing on some team, but they don't have the full story. So it's just a very confusing landscape. And in fact, it's that kind of got me off of the UFO topic, I think, in about, I spent a couple years like really going down the UFO rabbit hole after my sighting. And then it's like, oh my God, this field is just so full of people who are too credulous, or people who are, obviously covering things up, and people who are spreading disinformation and so on. And that was long before the current wave since 2017. Right. So I just sort of put the UFO topic aside, and it's only in the last couple of years that I've sort of gotten back into it, but I'm not, I can no longer keep track of who all the players are.
It's hard.
And who's trustworthy and who's not, and who's got, an agenda.
Well, I recently was attacked by the New York Times, which means I'm probably over the target, for saying that our government probably has anti-gravity, probably has some type of zero-point energy, probably has, or is at least working on some type of time travel technology. I know you're familiar with T. Townsend Brown's work. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're familiar with AC gravity, Dr. Neil Lee's work in anti-gravity. Mm-hmm. You tend to agree?
Yeah,
there's technology there.
Yeah, Jesse Michael's stuff red pilled me on that. I mean, I that was another topic that I had sort of been really skeptical about.
Which is good. That's good. That's your reaction initially.
Yeah, I think it's important to have skepticism toward all this. But seeing the story of Thomas Townsend Brown, and I'm convinced that that's what you're saying is probably correct, and that this is probably all in the hands of defense contractors who, are not beholden to FOIA requests. And not.
Hal Puthoff said that recently in the documentary.
Right.
That's how they would hide this technology.
Exactly. No, it's all making a lot of sense. Why we don't know more than we do. I think that's been the big benefit of the whole disclosure movement the last several years, is that I think we're all kind of learning a lot more about how the government works and how the military industrial complex works, and how these secrets can be kept, and how people can be kept in the dark, how everyone can be kept in the dark. Presidents, let alone you or me.
Sure, they're just temporary employees.
They're just temporary employees. And so when I got out of I sort of departed from the UFO topic in about 2011, and I started reading about the Cold War because, I realized that the backstory here, a big part of the backstory is, the CIA and the Cold War, the military-industrial complex, and defense contracting and all that. So I got, I acquired a big library of, books on what now is called deep politics,
Right.
I recommend that for anyone who wants to think about UFOs. You cannot think about this topic until you have learned a bit about what the United States did after World War II, and how our intelligence community works, and how the defense industry works, and how defense contracting works, and I think what we're seeing is that those deep politics, are really at play. And
from Roswell to Stargate, all the way through.
Everything, yeah.
Well, I consider you a thinker, so let's just play for a second.
Well, I'm glad you do.
Everybody does. There's not a lot of, you don't come under a lot of fire from skeptics. Even people who are skeptical of your work, they say that it's thoughtful. So I think you have a lot of respect from the scientific community, no? Do you feel there's hostility?
I don't think the scientific community is really aware of me. I think if you're talking about mainstream science, I think
yes.
People who are interested in these topics are often hostile to mainstream science. And that's where I get the pushback, is because people see me as a materialist.
And you don't consider yourself one?
I consider myself sort of a materialist, but I want to see the answer is not to throw out materialism or to pretend that the last 4 centuries of science are bullshit, or that we've been looking in the wrong direction. But science needs, like every other human institution, has a lot of problems, a lot of biases. It's ripe for some major paradigm shifts, and that's what I'm saying is what needs to happen is a paradigm shift within science and within other fields as well. But I'm not someone who would say that the last 4 centuries of materialism has been a dead end. I mean, people who say that materialism is dead, like, really? I mean, how many medications are you taking?
Right.
I mean, you're
Totally
how old and you're still alive?
Right.
Guess who you have to thank for for that fact.
Look, I hate big pharma too, but I'm kind of glad they're there.
Exactly.
So that takes me back to just the thought experiment for a second. Is what does the world look like if those technologies become public? We're in sci-fi world now, but what does that look like?
Yeah, if they became public all at once, I could see where that would be a really disruptive thing. I can definitely see, I wrote, Becoming Time-Faring, sort of trying to take a kind of techno-utopian view of these technologies, transforming our lives. The reality is they're going to be secret. And they probably need to be. And it's going to be a long time before they trickle down into our everyday lives. It'll probably happen first in the realm of computing. But
in the realm of computing, meaning like quantum computers?
Like quantum computers, yeah. Which I think are devices that are going to facilitate communication across the 4th dimension,
Sure. We're even seeing that proven in labs now.
Yes, absolutely. But yes, I mean, potentially, anytime you're talking about vastly superior energy sources like quantum, like 0-point energy or whatever, or time travel, it's like these are disruptive things that could be turned into weapons. So there are probably very good reasons why we don't know about them, but it's also makes one incredibly angry that if there are better fuel sources out there that the oil companies have been suppressing,
which I firmly believe.
Which I firmly believe as well. That needs to end, and we need to do what we can to end that and bring at least some of these technologies to humanity and solve our problems rather than create more problems for the planet.
I see this fight between Jung and Freud in all your work. This where you lean into sort of this positive view, and then you pull it right back. Like, okay, we're not going to get there. We're not going to get there.
No, I'm not saying we're not going to get there. But
I'm not.
No, I think eventually. But there are a lot of opposing forces,
Yep. Well, at least looking at time loops and how you basically solve the grandfather paradox for me, which we'll get into specifically, I don't think we've turned time travel into a weapon because we haven't.
I've heard things.
What have you heard?
I've heard that there are weapons based on manipulation of time. Then that's literally all I've heard, but I have heard that, and what do I do with that? I don't know. But
did that source tell you what the actual practical mechanism is?
No, and they didn't know either. That they're telling me something that they had heard from somebody who'd heard it. So that's the problem with this whole field, is you're dealing with people who've heard rumors from people who've heard rumors.
But I believe it. Everything that we know about Stargate.
It makes sense. It makes sense to me. If the Nazi Die Glocke
the bell
stuff is real, then certainly we have done something with that. And
well, if you're working on anti-gravity, you're working on
time. Right. These are all connected. So yeah, if you have anti-gravity technology, you have kind of time manipulation technology. So they all go together.
Okay, I'm trying not to let you scare me, but I do believe it. I don't know if we should take a quick break before. No, we can get into block universe, because I think that's sort of the structural pillars of a lot of this is block universe, what that is, and we can kind of just create the foundation for people who are maybe new to that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So what is the block universe? So when Einstein published his first paper on special relativity in 1905, I think, he wasn't thinking cosmologically, whatever. He was dealing with questions of light and how light works and how reference frames work. But his math teacher, Hermann Minkowski, saw the implications of what he was saying, that if this is true, which it seems to be, then...
If what's true, connecting...
If relativity, special relativity is true. If there's no objective reference frame, then there is a point of view on any moment that feels open-ended, that from which it's actually in the past and it's already happened. So you and I sitting here talking right now, we feel like we are moving through a timeline and it's open-ended and you have no idea what's going to happen next, and you could say fuck and then 10 seconds and I wouldn't predict it, whatever. But there's a point of view on which all of this has already happened.
Right.
So it's so just as we think of the past as solid and fixed, the future is also solid and fixed. And what he called this was the space-time continuum. And he put a hyphen in there, space-time continuum. And it's come to be called the block universe because you can sort of visualize it as a big block in which there's one of the dimensions is time. And so we're all flowing, we may think we're just, bodies moving through the universe, but from that four-dimensional perspective, we're worms, we're snakes, we're snaking through that four-dimensional block. And the present moment is a cross-section. It's a three-dimensional cross-section of that four-dimensional reality. And that, again, that future already exists. And theoretically can interact with the past in different ways. You can have Things like what we call wormholes now, which were theorized actually pretty early.
By Einstein and Rosen, yeah?
Oh, yeah, but before that, I think it was Gödel who solved Einstein's field equations in a way to show that you could have a path through space-time that actually wound up in your own past.
Yes.
And, and this was, Einstein was not thinking in these terms. He was not, and in fact, he was initially just as alarmed by the idea of time travel as pretty much anyone is, because the first thing you think is like, wait, no, that can't happen, and that would lead to paradox and blah, blah, blah. He thought that too, but then he came around because his colleagues showing him, no, the math shows that this is possible. Mm-hmm. And then we have, things like wormholes where you could have, create a passage through space, but if you take one of the mouths of the wormhole and you move it in near the surface of a black hole and then move it back out, then they're out of sync with each other and you can have time travel between those. So there's other possibilities, warp drives, Alcubierre warp drives and so on, which are time machines as well as space machines. So the block universe, is sort of the basic premise that makes all of this possible. And it's still not really questioned among most physicists.
So this kind of throws away the many worlds interpretation, yes?
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, it does, yeah.
So can you explain, because this was mind-blowing to me, as I told you earlier, I did an episode on synchronicities based on Jung's famous scarab story. Mm-hmm. And part of my research was time storms. And I was halfway through the episode and I went, well, shit, I'm wrong about all of this. And it doesn't happen a lot where someone just changes my whole point of view on a specific topic, but you did, because I think you solved the grandfather paradox.
Well, do you want to talk about the scarab story?
We can do that, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is my favorite example of a time loop. It really is the best illustration of what I mean by a time loop. Okay, so for people who don't know, this patient came into Jung's office one morning, let's say, and she told him a dream that she had had the night before, that someone gave to her this piece of jewelry in the shape of an Egyptian scarab beetle. And right as she's telling him this dream, he hears a tap on the window behind him, and he turns around, and there's a rose chafer beetle, which was sort of the European equivalent of the dung beetle or the scarab. And he opens he was whatever else you want to say about Jung, he was a brilliant shaman.
Yes.
And he opened his window, took the beetle, handed it to her and said, "Here's your scarab." And it was like this mind-blowing moment for both of them.
Yes.
And he said that it was the moment that opened his patient up to mysteries and so on. It was really a decisive turning point in her treatment. Now, he sort of described this, and he used the term synchronicity to sort of collapse this sort of time dimension and say time doesn't matter here. This was, she's telling the story about a scarab and then a scarab shows up. But really what was happening, she had a precognitive dream. This was not synchronicity. This was something unfolding in time in the wrong direction. This woman had a precognitive dream about being handed a scarab beetle. And lo and behold, the next morning it happens. And anyone who keeps a dream journal and is aware of precognition, yep, that's what happens. But in this case, what makes that so hard for people to grasp is that, but wait, it was her telling him her dream that got him to open the window and give him the scarab. Without that element, this would not have happened. So they think, isn't that a paradox? But it's not a paradox. It's actually a loop. It's a tautology, because her dream caused her to tell her doctor the dream, which caused the doctor to turn around and see a scarab beetle and give her the beetle, and which is what caused her dream in the first place. So it is a loop. It is a causal loop.
It's what blew my mind was she wasn't seeing the future; she was remembering it.
She was remembering the future, yeah. She
Yes.
wasn't seeing the future, she was remembering it in a way, or pre-membering.
So
the future.
sending information back
Yes.
to her.
Yes, to her younger self.
So she didn't really have to do anything.
Right.
It was going to happen. She
It was going to
remembered it
happen.
happened.
Yes.
That's what's kind of, once you get your mind around it, which isn't that hard. If you just let everything else go, many worlds, all that, it just unfolded. I think you call it the backstory. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that her dream was part of the backstory of that event happening in the office. But you can't, when you tell a story like this, and that's the problem I always have with my books, is like, how do you tell these anecdotes? Because really, if causation is circular like that, you could start the story anywhere. You could start the story with the beetle showing up at the window, or you could start the story anywhere in that narrative. It's all sort of equally causal, and that throws us off because we're used to linear stories. We're used to stories being linear. So it's hard to wrap our heads around that, but it's the opposite of a paradox. A paradox is something that can't happen.
Right.
A tautology is something that must happen and therefore is not interesting in a way, or not interesting to a logician because, it's not fair to defend an argument by its antecedents, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, right. But it's the way the world works, I think.
So
in a time travel universe, in any universe where time travel or time traveling information is allowed, then everything on some level is tautological.
You said it must happen. That sounds like teleology to me. That sounds like Plato and Aristotle.
It's teleology. This is the whole reason why people reject this, is because in the time of Francis Bacon is the one who rejected teleology from the story of science.
Well, let's explain teleology.
So teleology was one. So Aristotle codified these, I think, 4 different kinds of causation, and one of them was efficient causation. That's what we understand as causation. One thing leading to another, like billiard balls. But one of them was teleological causation. That is to say, the end. Telos meaning the end. In some sense, causing what happened before it. Now, this was a part of the Aristotelian framework for centuries. But then in the 1500s, Francis Bacon, sort of one of the first real thinkers about trying to create what we now think of as the sciences. He wrote, and I'm blanking on the name of his book, but he wrote this book in which he, basically laid out what causation was and banned teleological causation. Say we can't accept, causation from the future. But the reason was that teleology at that time, the only teleology people could imagine was God's divine plan.
Right.
Okay. And the idea was taking God out of the equation, taking God out of the scientific equation. So what they did was throw the baby out with the bathwater. Really, they threw out teleology, and ever since then it has been rule numero uno in science that causes travel in a single direction, and you can't have anything that defies that unilinear causal story.
But your future is pulling you toward this result.
Yes, that's what I'm arguing a lot. What more and more physicists are arguing is that no retrocausation. That's the new word for teleology.
Yes.
Sort of a non-divine teleology.
And we'll get to that later, not just in theory, but in practice, how some of the cool experiments that are proving that. Before we go to the break, and I would love to come back with a couple more time loop stories because people love those, and then talk about creativity.
Yeah, sounds great.
But the last question is, why are we wired, programmed, evolved to perceive time in this linear way?
That is a great question, and I don't have an answer to it.
I don't think anybody does. I was hoping you had something, but
you can speculate about why it's important for an organism to perceive time in a certain way and not another way. I can certainly say that you can imagine why you would want to perceive only the present moment, or perceive only a very narrow slice of time that was synchronized with what's happening in your environment and your body and so on. Like I don't want to be responding right now to what's going to happen in 10 seconds. That's
right. Worry about the bear. Don't worry about the future.
Right. Yeah. You worry about what's happening right now. So that's going to create sort of a collapsing of, it's not going to be helpful. It's not really going to be adaptive to be precognitive all the time. Just the same way it's not going to be adaptive if I'm only responding now to something that happened 10 minutes ago. Okay, you want to be responding in the moment to something happening in the moment, and if you're going to survive. Now, there's going to be a certain advantage to having a certain amount of memory for things that have already happened, but which might happen again. Likewise, there's going to be a certain advantage for knowing having an inkling of what's coming down the pike.
Inklings and intuition.
Right. So, what we're talking about when we talk about precognition is we're really talking about intuition, what has always been called intuition. What I'm arguing is that intuition is really based on real signals from a real future. And it's not just calculating the odds of something happening based on what's happened in the past. It's actually getting signals, indirect and fuzzy signals from an actually existing future.
That's a great cliffhanger. We'll be right back. We're back. Can we define what precognition is, or at least how you define it?
Yeah, precognition is being influenced by a future experience in some way. Now that could be, some people will say seeing the future. I don't think it works that way. I don't think it's a kind of perception. I think it's a kind of memory. I think it's memory going in the opposite direction, basically. But being influenced by a future emotional experience, for instance, or just an interesting experience, something salient in the landscape of your future that exerts an influence on you in the present. Now, via a dream, via intuition we were talking about, via a lot of people when they're meditating will have flash kind of visions when they're meditating. These often turn out to be precognitive. People who are prone to sort of having a vivid imagination or very suggestive, they'll have visions that are, or they'll hear voices. It's different for everybody, but they'll, in one way or another, it's that the future experience kind of leaking into the present and influencing you.
So if dreams are, I know we don't really know, but if it's consolidation of memories, organization of memories, that would make a lot of sense that it's connected to this phenomenon.
Yeah, it makes every bit of sense based on what what mainstream psychologists will tell you about dreams, which is that they're involved in the making of memories. That if precognition is a form of memory, and if at night your long-term memory is being sort of formed based on recent experience or past experience, well, then why not future experience as well?
And you're a long-time dream journaler, yeah?
Yes. Yeah, I got really interested in, I've been interested in dreams my whole life, but I had one of my professors in graduate school in the early 90s was a psychoanalyst, actually. And so I had some seminars on psychoanalysis and Freud and got very interested in dreams through that. And I started keeping a dream journal, I would say in the mid 90s, 94, 95.
You still keep it up?
Yeah, when I can. I have little kids now, and
right, I understand.
It makes a lot of things hard. But as much as I can, I still keep a dream journal. I used to keep an electronic dream journal. I used to keep a Word file open. Well, back in the 90s, it was Word Perfect. I still have old Word Perfect files that I can't open because they were password protected, and they're now on little floppy disk, whatever. Who knows what's in those?
You must be a badass lucid dreamer.
I'm not that great at lucid dreaming. Yeah, no, we were talking about lucid dreaming before the show, and I went through a period when I was really, really into it, and I was having some luck, and every now and then I'll have a lucid dream, but it's not like a regular thing for me. And I used to be better at sort of getting into a lucid state from meditating on the edge of sleep. I
Yes.
sort of had a technique, and I kind of lost it. I lost the knack. But then again, when you have kids, you kind of you don't have time for that stuff.
You don't. It's really hard to do. It takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I even achieved an out of body experience.
I wanted to,
Yeah.
that was just on the tip of my tongue. Is lucid dreaming connected to out of body experience, astral travel?
Yeah, I think out of body experiences are. Well, here again, this is controversial, but I think they're part of the same spectrum, and that they're just particularly vivid lucid dreams. But I think they're precognitive.
Have you had any of these?
Yes, I've had. I would say I've had 4 definite out of body experiences. One when I was young, and I had no way of processing it. It was very cool, but what the fuck,
Right.
And then I had a couple of spontaneous ones in the late 90s, I guess.
Was something going on in your life?
I don't really remember, honestly. I did write them down though, and one of them turned out to be, you could argue it was precognitive of what I did right after I got up out of bed to investigate my dream. And then the one that I was able to successfully induce, this was after months of working with one of the manuals on how to have lucid dreams, one of the modern books. It turned out to be, it was kind of a wild, weird, random experience, but it turned out to be precognitive, very vividly precognitive of events exactly a year in the future.
Really?
Yeah, this is one of the really interesting phenomena of precognitive dreaming is this aspect that I call calendrical resonance, where you will have a dream about an event on the exact same day a year later or multiple years later on the same date. This is something that anyone who does precognitive dream work notices. It's a very, very common thing.
About a week or two ago, I had a very vivid dream about Dad. I woke up and I said, that was weird. And it was his death day, which I'd forgotten about.
Okay, well, this is why. See, consciously we're not aware of the date necessarily. I certainly am not. I couldn't tell you what date it is right now, but unconsciously we're aware of that, and that same kind of process that'll oh God, I'm feeling sad today, and then you look at the calendar, it's oh, it's the day my dad passed away.
Yes,
it's that same process that's pre-minding you of something that's going to happen on the same date in a year or in 10 years or multiple years. I mean, I've had precognitive dreams. My longest distance precognitive dream that I've clocked so far is 26 years.
What?
Yes.
You have to tell us what these are.
Well, the problem is most precognitive dreams are just they're boring. They're not things that would really make sense to other people. I can certainly describe it, but it's not anything that's going to wow you. It's not like a dream about a terrorist attack or something like that.
Right.
But nevertheless, it's very common. Anyone who does precognitive dream work over any length of time will tell you, you have dreams that are on the pre-anniversary of events. I had precognitive dreams about about very specific details of the births of both of my daughters exactly a year beforehand. Now that's a year, so it's you can't. It's not like 9 months. It's it's
right,
a
a year
before. Very specific details, so there is a way in which we are unconsciously aware of the date. And it may be, in fact, that dreams are part of a system that's not only consolidating memories, but it's constructing your internal timeline.
Well, what was your 1 year one and your 26-year one?
Well, we'll talk about that out of body experience first. So it was wild. It was sort of a 2-part experience. I was doing these exercises, these kind of meditative exercises to induce an out-of-body experience. And I had semi-success previously, you'll go into a lucid dream, or you'll have sort of a sleep paralysis type experience, or you'll have Kundalini kind of sensations. But this time, boom, it feels like I am like just in reality.
You skipped all that hypnagogic craziness?
Yeah, just go straight. Yeah.
Wow.
But where I was down near the floor of a closet in my hallway, like in front of my wife's shoes. My wife's shoes, she kept her shoes on the floor of this closet. And I'm like staring at these shoes. And I can't like really control anything. I'm just staring at my wife's shoes. And it was really weird. And then and I had a sensation of being weighed down. I had sort of a scary sensation. I was being weighed down by my cat, Cindy. I couldn't see her. She was on my back. She was on my back somehow, weighing me down. Okay?
On your physical body or on your
just
astral?
On my astral body, whatever. And just strange. And it was kind of associated with a feeling of terror, almost like that sleep paralysis kind of feeling of terror that you have. But in this case, I'm staring at my wife's shoes, and my cat is sitting on my back. And then it changed, and I was immediately in my office, which was just like maybe 10 feet farther down the hall. And I was up by the ceiling of my office, looking down through the window onto the street below. And it was like my office. I was in my office, and I was looking down through the window, but I was up by the ceiling, looking down through the window, and there was these two green lights that looked like eyes, kind of like green eyes looking at me, but there was no face or anything like that. But it was kind of spooky, like these two green eyes, glowing eyes looking at me. And then, it was at this point, this is all unfolding over the span of maybe 10 seconds. Okay. I remembered the main instruction of the manual that I was following, which was keep your flights short. Go back to your body immediately, because you were not going to remember it otherwise.
It'll pull you out.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So I don't think I had a sensation of flying back to my body, but I basically just woke up at that point. I was like, whoa, wrote it down, everything. I really didn't know what to make of this experience. But then, so exactly a year later, I think this is a year minus 1 day. I think it was off by 1 day. I found I had that closet that I told you about. That's where we used to keep our medicines and stuff like that. And I dropped an Advil on the floor, and I was down on the floor rummaging among my wife's shoes, looking for that Advil that I've dropped, because I was worried my cat, Cindy, the one that had been weighing me down, I was worried that she was going to, or had eaten this Advil. And their Advil is very toxic to cats.
Yes.
So I couldn't find the Advil, and I wound up taking her it was a whole ordeal, taking her to the hospital, to the pet hospital.
Did you remember the experience when you're kind of rooting around the shoes like, oh, shit?
I don't remember exactly at what point I put this together. I think it was the second experience that jogged my memory of the out of body experience. So that same day, that same evening, I got up on a ladder in my study to change the light bulb in my study. And I stood up there and I looked down. Sorry, I banged the
That's okay. I'm excited
microphone.
too.
I was up by the ceiling of my study and looking down through the window, and I saw two little green lights.
The eyes.
And it wasn't eyes. It was my power cord for my laptop. It was an Apple laptop that has a little green diode.
This guy right here.
Right there. It was the green diode, but it was being reflected in two panes of glass. So there was two green dots. And it's something I wouldn't have been able to see if I was down on the floor, but I saw it up from where I was. And that's what I think I go, oh my God, this is the scene from my out of body experience. So I pieced together the rest of it, that this was not an out of body experience. It was a precognitive precognitive of an in-body experience in a different location
You
later
were
in my
floating.
life.
You were on the
I was on a
Right.
ladder. Now, I know a lot of people have out-of-body experiences
Sure.
in which they see their body. So I'm not saying that that's what all out-of-body experiences are, but I think it's a hypothesis that people should consider who are interested in this topic and who are able to achieve these things, which is, it's very difficult, and I've never been able to do it again.
Can anybody learn this though?
Yeah, theoretically, the book I was following, now I have a lot of books on out-of-body experiences, including some of the old classics like, I forget. There's a really great book from like the 1930s that's fantastic, and I wish I could remember the name of it. But there's a more modern teacher in Australia named Robert Bruce, who does sort of body work kind of stuff, and he wrote a very, very good guide. Now, I don't agree with his cosmology, and I'm about what's happening, whatever. But his techniques are very sound, I think, and he really gets, he really understands how you induce these things. So I was following his guide. I think Astral Dynamics is his book.
Is it like a wake to sleep method, that type of thing?
No, it's more. It involves meditating. It involves learning to meditate on different parts of your body and feel sensations throughout your body.
Yes.
Sort of a body scan kind of thing. That's very crucial, honestly. And I've found it to be really important just for meditating in general it's counterintuitive, but you're going to access that precognitive thing by focusing on physical sensations.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And anyway, so learning to sort of scan your body and feel kind of energetic sensations in all parts of your body is what is kind of the doorway to having these experiences, according to him. And it worked in one case for me.
So for people listening that want to start, I'm asked about lucid dreaming all the time because I'm obsessed with it. I say dream journal is the gateway. You must start. You can't do it without it. And the more you journal, at least in my experience, the better you get at remembering. Yes?
Right. Absolutely.
Do you go back to your journal and when something feels weird?
Sometimes. You know what? So the pioneer of precognitive dream work was a guy named J.W. Dunn, who I talk about in all my books. But he was an aeronautical engineer in the early 20th century. And he lived in a time when, records took up physical space. And so he recommended just keeping 3 days worth of dream records and then throwing them out.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Because it would quickly, my dream journals, I printed them out for a while, and that turned into binders that were really thick. And that's just from a few years.
Did you tell us your 26-year precognition? Did you tell us?
No,
that?
I didn't tell you that one.
We have to remember that one.
Okay. It's not that interesting, but it was interesting to me, but it was not.
Well, these are all very personal, aren't they?
They're very, very personal, yeah. But the point is, no one would have the time to, let alone storage space, to record every dream over the course of your life and compare every dream over the course of your life to every experience over the course of your life.
Of course.
So he can find it to just go through the last 3 days dream records, and catch those short-term, precognitive dreams. But yeah, it becomes too big a task. I know someone who's who lives this reality totally, and she's she keeps voluminous dream records and goes through and tracks every connection between her dreams and reality, and it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling, but it would drive me crazy.
It's a great task for AI because it's great at pattern recognition.
Yes, if AI is aware of your actual waking life experiences.
True.
See,
True.
you have to be recording not only your dreams, but you have to be recording everything. And, that quickly becomes an unmanageable sort of task.
Well, tell us your 26-year dream. And then you had a 9/11 dream, didn't you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The 26-year dream was this. It was a dream about it being in this this certain environment. I'm blanking on the name of the artist. He was sort of a precursor of the surrealists. But
It'll come to you.
Yeah, it'll come to me. Anyway, I was in this very specific environment, in this very moving around this square, and there was a character with a gun firing a guy. It was very stage play like, and very much like the work of this certain painter, and the scenario was very specific, and I wrote it down at the time, but I've always remembered that dream because it was just so particular and specific. And then this past year, I was reading a book about another artist, and they talked about this artist that I'm trying to think the name of, and it was just a sentence about this person's art that was exactly what happened in my dream, and it was just like, whoa, and it really struck me. And then there was something else on that page that was like really like amazing, like mind blowing to me. It was like really an important reading experience.
What was that?
It's too personal.
Okay.
It's too personal to say, but I thought, oh my God, this is my dream that I had, that one dream I had. And so I went back to my dream journals, and guess what? It was the same date.
Holy shit.
26 years earlier.
Calendrical.
I think this is happening all the time, and we're just not aware of it because, who records their dreams? If they do record their dreams, do they go back to their dream records? Probably not. If they,
I don't.
If they're paying, yeah, that's the thing. I kept dream records for decades without, even before I was aware of the topic of precognitive dreams. And it's only thanks to the fact that I had been keeping those dream records, I've been able to identify a lot of precognitive dreams from that time period. But most precognitive dreams go undetected. So I think this is the mental shift people have to make. People think that, if you had a precognitive dream, it must be something super significant, and there's a reason you had this premonition or whatever. No, I think it's an automatic process that the brain is constantly doing this, and we're just not aware of it.
Could our dreams just be littered with all these just minutia of the future?
It's absolutely, it's minutia of the future. That's a great way of putting it, because they're so minute and specific that they're hard to tell these stories to other people often. I mean, it's the dreams about plane crashes and 9/11 and stuff like that that makes a good enough story to tell someone else. But, just having a dream about some very random, specific personal experience in your day, it's meaningful to you.
Right. I spilled coffee on my shirt. It's bothering me.
Exactly.
But you dreamed about that 2 days ago.
Right.
In some way.
Right.
But you can't really recognize it because it hasn't happened.
Right. Exactly.
It's difficult to get your mind around it, but
yeah.
But I love it. So what is it about 9/11? Because there's a lot of precognitive dreams about 9/11. Is it
I would bet that everybody dreamed about 9/11 before it happened.
Were you in New York?
No, I wasn't. I had just moved to Washington, D.C. actually a week beforehand. I'd moved on September 1st, 2001. I was living in a suburb of D.C. and working in Tenleytown neighborhood, which is far away from the Pentagon. In fact, as it was happening and people were saying planes hit the Pentagon and stuff like that, it took me a long time to realize, oh wait, that's that's where I live now. But no, that morning, and I still have the dream record. It was it was just a dream about two identical buildings that had these corrugated gray facades, and they were mosques somehow.
Oh boy!
And there are other details in the dream which I sort of decoded afterwards that also made sense in terms of the events. But okay, that's weird. I wrote it down. And I don't even think that as the events were happening, I was thinking of that dream. I think it was the next day that I looked at my dream record and go, oh shit, I sort of had a dream about this or related to this. But it's like, I had never before or since have I dreamed about two identical square buildings that have like gray corrugated facades. The topic of Islam and was not on my radar at all until that morning of 9/11, when suddenly it came on everyone's radar.
Right.
And I'd never, I was able to do an electronic search of my records, did the term mosque ever show up? No, that's the one the one time in my life I've ever dreamed about mosques or anything related to Islam. But and there were symbolic aspects of the dream that I don't want to go into too too personal, but that related to the topic of suicide. And which makes sense again in terms of the events of that day.
So if lots of people are remembering 9/11, pre-remembering, they're not having an out-of-body experience. They're not experiencing it. They're more reminding themselves of just watching the news?
Their experience of watching CNN. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories like this. In one of your books, you talk about the Michael Richards case.
Yeah.
Would you mind regaling us? I know you told it a million times. It's a great story.
It's wild. Yeah, it's one of the best stories, honestly. I mean, tragic, but I mean, one of the most clear stories, I think, of precognition in the arts.
We can invite everybody to look this up as you're telling the story.
Yeah. Just look up Michael Richards. And we're not talking about Michael Richards, the comedian who was on Seinfeld. We're talking about Michael Rolando Richards, who was a sculptor in New York in the 1990s. He was sort of an up-and-coming young Jamaican-American sculptor. And over the last couple of years of the 90s, he made a series of sculptural self-portraits of himself dressed as in a flight suit, where he had fallen to the ground, had parachuted to the ground, or where he was crashing to the ground, and in the most famous case, he's standing vertically erect in a flight suit and he's being pierced by multiple little airplanes. Okay. Well, sort of on the strength of his growing body of work, he got studio space in Tower One.
Yep.
The Lower Manhattan Cultural Council gave out studio space to a cohort of like 15 artists twice a year. So they would spend 6 months in their studios, high in the towers, and then there would be an exhibition at the end. They'd show their work. Anyway, so he was one of the summer 2001 cohort, and he was working apparently based on people who had visited his studio before the attacks. He was working on, a self-portrait of himself riding a burning meteor, and another self-portrait of himself as a fallen angel, of his torso like having fallen to the ground.
Wow.
Okay. And so he was the only one of that artist cohort who was in his studio. He had stayed the night in the studio on the night of 9/11 and was killed in the attacks. He was on the 92nd floor, and that was the 91st floor was the top floor from which anyone was able to escape the building. Right. But that one, and he had lots of sculptures also of planes crashing. There's watercolor that he did of a burning plane. Just the incredible imagery, but there's that one sculpture which is called Tar Baby versus Saint Sebastian, of himself being pierced by airplanes, and that he died as a martyr on 9/11. Is just stunning.
It is
stunning.
The other artist was it Stephen Mandel?
Oh yeah, David Mandel.
David Mandel.
Yes. So this is I don't know if he's still alive, actually. He was a retired art teacher living in London. And he had a life history of precognitive dreams. And what he did was he painted watercolors of his dreams. And anyway, on the morning of September 11th, here is another calendrical resonance example. On the morning of September 11th, 1996, he wakes up from a dream in which the Twin Towers in New York are collapsing. And he actually does a drawing of it. And he goes, what he always did when he had a dream that he thought might be precognitive, he would take the drawing to his local Barclays Bank building, okay, and have himself photographed under the clock of the Barclays Bank to have the date for a date stamp. Okay.
Again, we can see this photo.
We can see the photo. Yes. And anyway, then a few months later, he had a dream about planes crashing into the towers, and he did a watercolor of that too. And so 5 years to the day after that one dream.
Is this what got you interested in creativity?
No, these cases, I mean, there are so many cases like they're not necessarily as vivid as that, but
but artists seem to be sensitive to this.
Yes. Anyone who's creative, using their imagination, they're tapped in to their, intuitive, precognitive abilities. And when I wrote my first book on precognition, called Time Loops, it was the connections to creativity that really interested me the most, even more than dreams, because, partly like a lot of people don't identify with dreams, like some people who are really into dreams really love hearing about dreams, but a lot of people don't really want to hear. No. But everyone can connect to creativity in some way, if not in the arts, in the sciences, whatever,
Just flow state.
Flow state, yeah. And I was really intrigued, honestly, it was Philip K. Dick because he had regular precognitive dreams, and he was very aware of how his stories played out in his life afterwards. And so it was Philip K. Dick was really the first case, and also Morgan Robertson, who wrote the story about the Titanic.
Tell that story, and then let's get into Philip K. Dick, because he's everybody's favorite.
Yeah.
So Morgan Robertson, which I covered, was the Titanic story.
Yeah, the Titanic story. So in 1898, Morgan Robertson, he's this sort of science fiction writer, writes this novel called Futility about the biggest ocean liner ever, called the Titan, which hits an iceberg on its third voyage.
This is the unsinkable Titan in the novel.
I don't know. Yeah, it's called Unsinkable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's on its third voyage between Liverpool and New York. I think going from New York to Liverpool in this case. And it strikes an iceberg, and almost all the passengers die because there's not enough lifeboats. And that's even like a plot point in the story.
Yep.
So 14 years later, he's as stunned as everyone else to read the New York Times headline that the Titanic, sinks and most of the passengers are lost because there's not enough lifeboats. So, really incredible story, and that's been looked at a lot. That's one of the most famous.
Well, he also wrote about World War I later on as well.
Let's see. Yeah, he had a number of stories that people have argued were prescient of things. It's been argued that he sort of precognized like technical developments like sonar, things like that.
Yes.
And he's another one of these artists who his life was full of synchronicity. Okay. I argue synchronicity is what it feels like when we're precognitive and we don't know it.
Yes.
It feels like, wait a minute, like how can these coincidences be happening? And it's your own precognitive brain that's guiding you through life, and you're
sure.
Yeah. And because you don't have a concept of precognition, you're like surprised by it. But yeah, I think that's, I think it's precognition really. But yeah, so Philip K. Dick.
Before you jump to that, just to connect this to people listening, everyone has that experience where you're thinking of somebody random and they call. Everyone has it.
Everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody. Yes.
So Philip K. Dick, who invented precog, right? Minority Report?
No, it's actually another one of his stories, I think, in which he used the term precog first. But yes, he's the inventor of the term precog. And precognition factors into a lot of his fiction. And he was himself very aware of precognition occurring in his life. And he was very thoughtful about it. And so he was aware of how he would write a story, and there'd be a character or some sort of plot element in the story, and then he would meet this character in real life, or he would read an article. Like he was an avid reader of like popular science magazines and stuff like that, and he would, like he wrote, he basically wrote about split brain research in
Scanner Darkly,
and then like 6 months later, before the novel came out, but he read an article in Scientific American or something like that about split brain research,
Right.
and all kinds of examples like that. And he's a wonderful case because you can not only see it happening with his fiction, but you can see it happening with his dreams, because he wrote tons of letters, and we have his letters. And if you want to shell out a couple $100, you can buy his letters, which I did, and it's totally worth it. Yeah, if there's two things I recommend people shelling out the money for, it's Philip K. Dick's letters and Jacques Vallée's journals. Those are the.
Can you get those?
Journal? Yes, Jacques Vallée's journals. Are you kidding?
I got to write that down.
Forbidden Science, volumes 1 through 6. Yeah. But anyway, so you can go through his letters and see him like telling he had this pen pal in the late 70s. I'm blanking on her name, but he'd write these long letters to this person and tell about these dreams he was having, and a lot of the kind of the rudiments of what became his exegesis, or you can find in his letters. But he was having dreams that then would play out in his life, and in a lot of cases he wouldn't identify himself. Like I think this is in Time Loops. I talk about a dream he had that he was clearly precognizing Close Encounters, like 3 years before the movie came out. But it's uncanny, the connections between this dream and Close Encounters. And we know from his journals that he was really fascinated with that movie. Like when it came out, he got all excited about UFOs, and he was reading UFOs, and he was reading Jacques Vallée.
Yes.
And there are interesting precognitive connections, I think, between him and Jacques Vallée going on.
You have to tell us, but wasn't there one, it was mind-blowing, where Jacques Vallée pre-remembered something about a PKD story? Maybe it was Vallis.
Well, so I argue, and it's an argument. It's hard. It'd be hard to summarize the argument.
It's a fun show.
Yeah, but I think that Vallis, is Vallée. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because. So what's the story here? Jacques Vallée in 1974 wrote the book we talked about before, Invisible College, where he develops the idea of UFOs as a control system. And he talks about psychic phenomena, and talks about Uri Geller, and talks about, and he floats the idea that that extraterrestrials could be broadcasting educational material to us, like Radio Free Europe.
Yes.
Okay. So exactly at the same time, but a year before his book is published, Philip K. Dick has his famous 2-3-74 experience and starts writing a novel based on it. And we have the first version of this novel, which was published after his death as Radio Free Albemuth. Okay. Right. And it's about this teaching satellite that broadcasts things to awaken sensitive people on Earth. It's basically the premise of Jacques Vallée's book. But Jacques Vallée's book had not come out yet. They did not know each other.
Can you imagine running into them at a Berkeley bar?
Oh, man.
Oh, wow.
If there are two people I would love to, get together in a room.
Yeah.
But, at that time, we know that Philip K. Dick was hearing voices. He was hearing, he would get these names that came to him at night. He would get, these ideas that came to him. He even thought he was the subject of an ESP experiment, which I don't rule out.
Neither do I. He'd be the guy.
He'd be the guy. Mm-hmm. And I think it's more than uncanny that he winds up, he calls this extraterrestrial control system Vallis. And it actually looks like a French word.
It does. It does.
And and I know, because I confirmed this with Tessa Dick, that in 1977, like 3 years later, same year that Close Encounters came out, he got really into UFOs and was reading Jacques Vallée's books. She couldn't remember the titles of Jacques Vallée's books, but the most recent one was Invisible College. So I'm certain that he read Invisible College 3 years later.
He must have.
And I think he was precognizing it when he was initially crafting this story that became Veilus, but long before he could read, before he did or even could read Jacques Vallée's work. So I think there's a connection going on there.
Did you find any others with Phil Dick, just for the fans like me, in his work that was precognition? Any other just examples that of PKD predicting the future?
Oh,
I don't mean to put you on the spot. I was just curious.
No, just dreams where he would predict something in his life, basically. But
well, when
the world becomes more and more Phil Dickian.
It does.
By the day.
When the androids are built, we're going to remember.
Boy, yeah. Did
you ever see his talk in Metz Fest 77?
Yeah.
Where he talks about, he was a many worlds guy, and he talks about that Man in the High Castle being an alternate reality. Yeah. What do you think he was seeing if many worlds is not a thing?
A person can be precognitive without having a correct theory of precognition.
He could be wrong.
He could be wrong. That's fine. Who cares? In fact, there's a part of me that thinks maybe you have to be wrong.
Yeah.
For it to work.
You had a great story about, I forget the author's name, of Lolita.
Yeah, Nabokov.
Nabokov. Yes.
Okay, so yes, when he was long before he became a famous author, when he was 17, he was this aristocratic kid in St. Petersburg, Russia, collecting butterflies and writing poetry and stuff. And his uncle Vasily dies and leaves him an estate, basically. So suddenly he is a rich man and set up for life. But a year later, the revolution happens and sweeps away the wealth of all these aristocrats, and he and his family have to go into exile. But at that time, his uncle Vasily appears to him in a dream and says, "I will come back to you as Harry and Kuvirkin." Okay. All right. So fast forward 40 some years, I believe. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the exact number. He's living in living in Ithaca, New York, working at Cornell, teaching English at Cornell, and, subsisting. He's not rich anymore. And he reads, a friend calls him up and says, "Have you read the New York Times today?" And there's an article in the New York Times about how Harris Kubrick Pictures has just purchased the rights to Lolita for a huge sum, for like something $150,000, which at the time was a lot. It's still a lot, but it was a huge amount at the time. Yeah. And so he learns basically from the New York Times that he is now a rich man.
Yep.
And here's the thing. So it's Harris Kubrick Pictures. Kuvirkin, if you anglicized it,
yes,
would be Kubrick.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And then, so he got interested, maybe because of that, I don't know, but he got interested in precognitive dreams, and he got interested in the writing of J.W. Dunn. And
who influenced a lot of writers.
He influenced a lot of writers. But Nabokov found Dunn's book called An Experiment with Time and read it and replicated his experiment. He did the experiment, which is basically keep dream records and go back to your dream records for the last few nights at least, and see what matches you get. And lo and behold, he got several hits, really nice hits of like exactly the kind of thing you would expect, which is like some like vivid, fantastic scene in your dream, and it turns out to be a scene in a children's cartoon that you see the next day, right, or something like that. So in fact, the two best examples are things he was watching on TV in the following couple days, like little scenes in shows that he was watching. Like the bulk of my precognitive dreams are like things on Twitter.
Sure.
Yeah. He replicated it, and J.W. Dunn was hugely influential on mid-century writers. J.R.R. Tolkien being one of them that people don't realize.
No, I didn't either until I read your work. Tolkien, I was like, what was the theory that Tolkien used? The elves were, because they're sort of immortal and omniscient.
They're immortal, yeah. They sort of live in this timeless reality, that their sort of cosmology, and it was based on J.W. Dunn's work. And Christopher Tolkien found notes in his father's writings. He'd found drafts of Lord of the Rings and notes about elvish time and the elves that were all sort of stuff, including diagrams taken from J.W. Dunn's books. So J.W. Dunn was influential on Tolkien. We don't know, unfortunately, if J.R.R. Tolkien ever kept a dream diary, which would be awesome.
Oh yeah,
which would be awesome.
I'd shell out for that one too.
Yes, but anyway, Dunn's ideas, at very least, were influential on him, and he and C.S. Lewis talked a lot about.
Just to wrap Tolkien, he has 2 unfinished time travel stories based on Dunn's work.
Yes,
that's fun.
Yes, yeah, the Lost Road. Yes, is one of them, and I forget the other one. But yes, he started writing a time travel novel. He and C.S. Lewis, because of Dunn's book, or maybe it wasn't because of Dunn's book, but they challenged each other. One of them, C.S. Lewis, was going to write a space travel novel, and Tolkien was going to write a time travel novel. And so he got four chapters into it and never finished it. But and there's a precognitive dimension to that unfinished novel too. That's pretty interesting, that I talk about in one of my books. But J.W. Dunn was a really, really interesting person, very interesting figure.
Well, we stumbled on a segue, so I have to pull another story out of you. We have Lord of the Rings, we have Peter Jackson, then we have the Beatles documentary, which everybody needs to watch. Everyone needs to watch.
Everybody. Yes.
So there's some precognition there, which I wasn't aware of until you told the story, and it blew my mind.
Well, I'm glad it blew your mind, because I was scared to tell that one, because I thought, are people going to just go, no? I don't know. I mean, some people I've suggested this to have looked at me with skeptical eyes, and it's there's no way of proving this stuff. That's the problem.
It's the unfalsifiable.
It's the unfalsifiable. Yes. So yes, so all this is speculation. But
I'm aware that you can make connections down the road and all of that.
Yeah.
It's interesting and fun. That's why we're here.
Right. But yeah, so yes, everyone should watch Get Back multiple times. It is one of the most phenomenal things. If you grew up, especially with the Beatles, it's one of the most phenomenal things ever put on film. I mean, it's unbelievable to be in this room with those 4 people and just watching their creative process is just beyond interesting. And so the way the series starts is, I'm forgetting the exact dates, but it's the first few days of what year, 1969? 69. And they're all in a room kind of noodling on different musical ideas. And Paul McCartney is there sort of noodling on this musical idea, and he's kind of got the tune, but he's struggling with the words. All I can think of is get back to where you once belonged. And then Jojo comes in. I think I have the chronology written down. I can't replicate it for you exactly, but he, a couple days later, he thinks of Jojo. Jojo left his home in Tucson, Arizona, whatever. But so a few days later, George Harrison leaves the band. This is the big cliffhanger ending of the first episode. George Harrison leaves the band.
Yes.
Walks out, see you around the clubs, he says, and walks out because he's kind of basically sick of Paul McCartney at that point. And so then they have to make 3 visits to, I think they all convened at Ringo Starr's house or whatever, to convince George Harrison to get back to where he once belonged. And to add to this, that line, get back to where you once belong, is something that Paul stole from George Harrison.
Right, from another song?
From another song George had written. Sour Milk Sea is this song that George had written and given to another artist. I forgot who recorded it. But basically, Paul took this line, kind of tweaked it a little bit, made it get back to where you once belonged. So basically, he's noodling on this idea. All he's got, to start with is get back to where you once belonged, Jojo. from Arizona, which sounds like Harrison.
Joe Jarrison.
Yeah. Anyway, and right that morning, the morning before George leaves at lunchtime. Okay, he walks out of the band. He says, "See you around the pubs."
Right.
Leaves at lunchtime. That morning, John adds the line, "But he knew it wouldn't last."
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's worth a rewatch. You'll watch it completely differently now.
But I mean, you can't prove that. But that's the way it works, though. I mean, these
But Paul and
artists,
John, they would have liked this theory. John would have liked this theory, I think.
I think John would have. Yeah. That's the way it works. I mean, artists get inklings of things, and they just get these ideas. Like, where does this idea come from? But it's like they have to work it out. Just kind of like Roy Neary in Close Encounters, like having a vision of this, like, tower thing and like trying to work it out. What does it mean? What is it? And you can reread that Close Encounters as Precognition if you want. Like, you can reread it as he's creating this thing and then looks over at the television and then sees what he's been working on. That's the way it happens in the lives of artists, that they work out these ideas and then they open a magazine. It's like, oh, Jesus, I just wrote a novel about this idea.
Well, any of these stories that are kind of teleological, where you're just sort of drawn to a conclusion or meant to be, you can go back and see that you could be in a loop.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
What is it about creativity and artists and emotion? Because all these seem to be tied to emotion, yes?
Yeah, I think it's just that artists are more, sensitive. They're more in tune with
emotional,
and more imaginative, more. I think everybody has an imagination. Everybody has an intuition, but some people they prioritize it.
That third eye is always kind of a little bit open.
Yes, and they're aware of it, and they're noting it. They're noting it at least mentally, if not on paper.
Right.
And that's what it takes to notice this stuff. Is you have to be noting. You have to be paying attention in your life, in your waking life, to make those connections to the dream world and to the world of creativity and stuff. So, like, when you're paying attention, that's why that again is another reason why meditation is so valuable, because it gets you to pay attention. Mindfulness, just being mindful. So I think the more mindful you are, the more you are going to notice this working in your life. I don't like when people talk about precognition as some kind of power or special power that some certain individuals have. I think it's basic to our functioning, and we're just not aware of it. And I think it's becoming aware of it that is what makes you a precog. I think we're all precogs, but a precog is someone like Philip Dick who is aware of this operating in their life and develops kind of an understanding of it, even if they're not necessarily completely correct. They don't need to be correct about it, but they can be just aware enough that they're aware that it's happening.
Well, you set up a great cliffhanger again for the break, is because this isn't magic. This is science and biology.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think we can.
But those can be magical. I don't want to be the kind of materialist who says you can't think of it as magic. It's perfectly fine to think of it as magic.
Quantum mechanics is magic.
Sure.
I don't think anyone would. Feynman would say so.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So can we talk quantum mechanics when we get back?
Yeah, sure.
All right. See you in a minute. So we talked about how Einstein relativity allows for time travel. We talked a little bit about creativity, precognition. Let's get into some of the science that makes this work. I guess Daryl Bem could be a good place to start.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so Daryl Bem's a really interesting guy. He's a psychologist at Cornell. He's emeritus now. But his story is interesting. He was never interested in parapsychology really until the 90s, I think the early 90s, when a colleague of his, a colleague or another psychologist anyway, named Charles Honorton, who was a parapsychologist and doing parapsychology research, wanted someone who had training as a mentalist to sort of be part of his experiments, because that's a good control, to make sure that there's no cheating and so on. And Daryl Bem is a trained mentalist. And he didn't necessarily have an interest in ESP or whatever, but he wasn't a knee jerk. He just didn't know anything about it. But he was game to sort of be part of these experiments, to sort of ensure that everything was kosher. And Anderson got, very, positive results in these. I think they were telepathy experiments, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe they were remote viewing. I'm not sure. But anyway, Daryl Bem realized, there's something to this. He's getting results, and so anyway, in the first decade of this century, he already had a very successful career as on personality and various topics. He was a very respected psychologist. But anyway, he did this large series of experiments in which he reversed cause and effect in basic psychology paradigms. One of them being like priming, like a typical priming experiment, you'd be subliminally shown some picture or whatever, and then see how it affects your behavior afterwards. Right. Well, he would do an experiment in which people perform on some test and then are shown something subliminal afterwards. Okay. So this kind of like reversal of cause and effect. Anyway, he got significant results in like 8 of 9 experiments that he did.
Can we explain the curtain test?
Yes.
The photos?
Yeah. Like this is the most famous one. He had, these were very large experiments with large groups of undergraduates. But he had undergraduates sit at a computer and choose which of 2 curtains on a screen had a picture behind it. Okay. Now I'll add, there wasn't actually already a picture behind these curtains.
They're just curtains.
It was generated randomly after the mouse click.
Right.
So, okay. Anyway, so they make a mouse click and then it shows if they're right or wrong. And they performed at chance, 50% correct, as you would expect.
50% was
when the picture to be revealed was boring. Okay.
Right.
Like a beach scene or something like that. But when the picture to be revealed was erotic,
yep. Emotional.
Adults engaged in consensual sexual acts.
Porno.
Yeah. They did better than chance.
I think 70%, something like that.
No, it wasn't that high.
Okay.
I mean, the effect size is still small in these experiments. But statistically, because he had so many participants and so many trials, it reached statistical significance. Okay. And then there's another series of experiments that sort of reversed the typical order of a memory experiment. So at a typical memory task, you might like be shown a word list, and then you engage in some seemingly unrelated task that reminds you of certain words on that list. And then you take a test on the word list, and you'll be expected to perform better on the words that you were reminded of. Okay.
Sure.
Well, in his version, he had kids look at a word list, then he tested them on the list. And then after the test, he had them engage in a task which subliminally reminded them of certain words on the list. And guess what? They did better on the words that they were subsequently reminded of.
Just let that land for a second.
Let that land. Yeah.
They were reminded of certain words later, and those happened to be the words they did better on from the list.
Yes. Retroactive facilitation of recall is what he called this.
Just to be fair to the skeptics, 2023, there was a replication issue, right, with Bem's research.
Okay, there's a lot of controversy about this. Immediately, the skeptics jumped on this in, this came out in 2011.
Right.
Immediately, skeptics were enraged. I mean, my colleagues at one of the psychology organizations were enraged.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then skeptics said, no, this can't be replicated. And here we tried to replicate it and we couldn't. But a lot of teams around the world did replicate it successfully. And yeah, don't get on Wikipedia because you will see a completely biased,
of course,
version of this. But I think something like 83 independent replications.
Yes.
I think something like that. So yeah, fascinating evidence for something like precognition. What he would call it presentiment, feeling the future. And that's what he called what he called it in his original article on this.
So for the skeptics of Bem's work, I think we have in the late 80s, physicist Aronoff's split laser test as a hold my beer. Right, that story?
Well, yeah, this wasn't Aronoff. This was, Howell and Dixon, I believe. This is also at Cornell,
right.
I think, where they took a laser beam, they put it through a beam splitter to create two identical beams. And essentially, the terms they use in physics are different, but they're essentially creating an experiment group and a control group like you'd have in a psychology experiment. And they did what was called a weak measurement on both of these beams, which is measuring the amplitude of the beam without interfering too much with the beam. And this is a challenge that we can talk about with these kinds of experiments.
This audience,
every time you measure something, you're interfering with it in some way.
Right, that's the collapse of the
challenge. Yeah, and the challenge is to try and find ways of measuring things that don't interfere too much, so that you can tell if a subsequent interaction is having a retro effect. Well, in any event, they split the beams, weakly measured both of the beams, and then did a strong measurement on one of the two beams. And lo and behold, the beam that got the strong later measurement was amplified like 10 times compared to the previously compared to the other beam, which suggests retrocausation. Now, you'll get controversies, and physicists will debate the significant, what this means and so on. But that seems to be evidence for retrocausation.
But John Wheeler's delayed choice, certainly.
That would be another example. So this is an active area of research, and multiple experiments have been conducted like that I just described, which seem to show retrocausation. Then you also have the field of quantum computing, which is showing that you can have indeterminate temporal ordering of computations in a quantum computer circuit. And I admit I am not a physicist. I'm not a computing researcher. So, this is all above my pay grade, but there's so many articles have come out in the last several years, showing that you can invert causal order in a quantum computing circuit.
Yeah. In Cambridge, they're solving problems with information from the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could we explain just a little bit about delayed choice, what's happening there, how it connects to time, the photons going back to the source, changing their state, that sort of thing? Just to remind folks.
Yeah. So, okay. So there's, let me take the example of...
Or if you have a different favorite.
Well, one of the experiments that I think excited John Wheeler. So his idea was that you could take light from a distant quasar, say, and choose to measure it a certain way, and it would show that how your choice of how to measure it had influenced the light from that distant quasar. Well, I'm blanking on his name, Ali, I think, an astrophysicist, I forget which university, but he heard Wheeler speak and had an idea for actually testing this using mirrors placed on the moon by the Apollo astronauts.
Yes.
Because they placed mirrors on the moon to bounce laser light back to sort of measure the very minute changes in distance between Earth and moon in different phases of its orbit. Well, they used, they shot a laser at the moon, and it takes I think a second for light to get to the moon and back. So that's enough time to change the parameters of an experiment.
Unless you're Nixon on the phone, then it's instant.
Right. Yeah. And it showed indeed that you can change how you're going to measure light, and the light somehow seems to know.
It seems to know.
Seems to know how it's being measured. Yeah. Well, seeming to know something that you shouldn't be able to know, that seems like telepathy, but another way of looking at telepathy is that it's really precognition, that the light was influenced by that subsequent measurement, and that information essentially from the future traveled back in time along the world line of that photon.
Right. It fulfilled its destiny.
It fulfilled its destiny. Yeah. So there's all kinds of reasons to think that, yes, retrocausation is a real thing at the smallest scales in nature. Now, that quantum realm where you're talking about individual particles, behaving in seemingly impossible ways. But there are certain circumstances where you can scale up that quantum magic. And that's when this topic of entanglement comes in. When you entangle particles together, you can create a larger and larger object that enters the realm of objects that we're used to interacting with. And you can demonstrate that quantum magic at a large scale.
That could be the strong force measurement, right? Just this entanglement of the equipment.
Or a quantum computer. A quantum computer is a bunch of particles that are entangled together to create essentially an object that performs computations. And in those settings, you can, again, we talked about quantum computers reversing cause and effect. Sure. You can have a material thing that is responding to its future.
Yes.
Okay. And then set aside those ideas and enter the realm of biology, where more and more people are thinking that the brain could be a quantum computer or have quantum computing properties. And if that's the case, add all these up, and you get the idea that the brain could be a four-dimensional information processor that is responding to its future as well as responding to its past.
So on the show, I've covered quantum biology with the cryptochromes in the bird's eye, which has been proven that they're entangling with the magnetic field. Quantum processes in plants where they're finding the
photosynthesis is a quantum process.
They're checking all the paths simultaneously. Yes. It's superposition in real time on leaves. So clearly, the quantum state can be held in a wet, hot place.
Right. And that's always been the point of skepticism. You can't have entanglement occurring in a warm, wet environment like the brain. But it's increasingly being shown that actually you can, and that life is a quantum, is scaling up these quantum effects.
I want to ask you about microtubules in a second, but before we move to that, what did Niels Bohr, how did he address retrocausality? I know he didn't like any of this.
No, he did not. And Niels Bohr is a really important figure in the sort of, I'd say, century-long denial or refusal to look at retrocausation. Because ever since the 1920s, there has been this idea that retrocausation could explain a lot of this spooky quantum stuff. But the idea just keeps getting shoved aside, partly because of Niels Bohr's personality. I mean, he was just a very forceful personality, and he sort of got the whole field of physics to just basically agree to not interpret what was going on at a quantum level and just say it's random, and just accept that the world is random on a fundamental level, and that's the answer. And you just have to wrap your head around that. Well, a lot of people have not wanted to wrap their head around it. They have not been satisfied with that answer. Einstein famously said, God does not play dice.
That's right.
But Niels Bohr basically dominated the field until really the last couple of decades, when what's called the Copenhagen interpretation, and he was from Denmark, so it's called the Copenhagen interpretation, when it's kind of broken down. And now you have this kind of flurry of rival theories going on in the field. So you've got, besides the Copenhagen interpretation, you have many worlds theory that we talked about. You've got Bohm's pilot wave theory. You've got multiple rival theories, but retrocausation, or some version of retrocausation, and not all physicists call it retrocausation. The problem is they use different terms sometimes to mean the same thing.
Like what? What are we looking at?
Well, so they'll tell you that to be really precise, you can't talk in terms of causation anymore, and you need to talk in terms of constraints. And like they'll use different language because they don't want to give this impression that somehow energy is traveling from the future to the past and stuff like that. There's a team that wrote a book relatively recently called Beyond the Dynamical Universe, which is basically making this same argument that I'm talking about, but they don't use the term retrocausation, and they take pains to distinguish themselves from other physicists who use the term retrocausation, but they're basically talking about the same thing, which is that something happening in the future is constraining what's happening now, and thus that's a kind of information traveling backward in time. For us ordinary humans who need to be able to grasp this somehow, we need these clumsy expressions like influence or information traveling backward in time. We need to be able to put it that way so that we can wrap our heads around it. But that's, a physicist will have a more precise way of talking about it. But the basic idea is that what happens in the future influences what's happening now, and what's happening now influenced what happened in the past.
It's so elegant. I don't know why there's such resistance to it. It's so elegant.
Well, it takes away free will, or it seems to.
It does. That's something kind of stressful about your theories, is determinism and free will. So if everything that's going to happen is going to happen regardless, because we're on this timeline, then why does anything matter?
Well, right. That's where people's heads go.
Right.
But the more you sit with it, you get to another place. That I think.
That's a devil's advocate because I'm on board.
Yeah. That's what hangs people up. That's people's hang up. Yeah. It is a literal hang up. People get hung up on this question of free will, and they think, oh, well, then if it's going to happen anyway, what's the point? But, just think about that for a second. You can't know the future. That's the thing. This is what I call the precognition paradox. You cannot know the future.
Right. So
you cannot know the future, and you don't know how how the future is going to unfold based on your actions. And just laying in bed in the morning and not getting up and putting on your pants and going to work, that's an action just as much as getting up and putting on your pants and going to work.
It's true.
So it's like, it doesn't make any, you got to do something. And so I'm a Zen guy. All right. And
really?
Yes. And when you sit with the block universe as a koan, as a kind of, koan, you reach a point where you go, holy shit. It's beautiful. And it's like, it's liberating. It's liberating to get rid of the baggage of free will, determined, like, who fucking cares? It's just
easy for you to say.
Well, but it's honestly, this is a point you can get to when you treat this as a koan, as a riddle to be solved, and don't just like turn away from it. But that's unfortunately what generations of physicists have done. They've turned away from it because this trespasses on some philosophical idea that's really important for us as Westerners.
True.
And it's distorted their interpretation of the science, that's not scientific either. We've talked about ways in which scientists don't behave scientifically. Well, generations of physicists have avoided a very obvious and elegant conclusion, or a very obvious and elegant hypothesis about nature, simply because it is philosophically and culturally kind of uncomfortable. And that's not behaving scientifically either.
No, it's not. Fortunately, they all haven't. So eventually the evidence is just going to stack up.
Yeah, but it's it is, acquiring that evidence is tough because of this problem of distinguishing between, when you measure something, you're interfering with it. So how is your measurement, is it simply changing the future, or is it changing? It is very hard to test this experimentally, and for exactly the same reasons why it is hard to prove that my dream about two buildings with corrugated facades that were mosques on the morning before 9/11 wasn't a coincidence. I mean, it's,
Of course.
you can't prove that.
That will always be the counter.
The uncertainty principle. So that uncertainty principle is right there at the heart of the topic of precognition.
So before we talk about Penrose and Hemmeroff, which everybody listening knows, let me pull another story out of you, because I love the bootstrap paradox.
Yeah.
Did you, you've addressed this, I think, in your work. Can you explain what that is? And
Yeah. So the bootstrap paradox is my favorite. I mean, it's another way of putting a time loop, basically. It's the idea. So say you have here's an example that David Deutsch, the physicist and quantum computing pioneer, uses in a paper that he wrote in the 1990s. He says, okay, you have a Nobel Prize winning physicist. I'm sorry, Nobel Prize winning mathematician. And he has access to a time machine. And he goes back in time and finds himself, his younger self, studying in the library, and gives him the proof that he later won the Nobel Prize for solving. And so he basically just gave it to himself in the future. Right. And there's nowhere in that causal loop where anybody actually did the work of solving that math problem. Okay. Well, that's what makes steam shoot out people's ears. It's like,
bothered me since Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home.
Exactly. Yes,
right.
Exactly.
How do we know you didn't invent the thing?
Exactly. It's there at the heart of any time loop is this bootstrap paradox. But again, it's not really a paradox. Bootstrap paradox is a misnomer. It's a tautology. It's not a paradox. In fact, I think that everything is bootstrapping.
Wow, I hadn't considered that.
That goes all the way down. That in a time travel universe, in a universe that allows time travel at all, ultimately everything is bootstrapped. Everything's a bootstrap.
I guess it has to be. And
this is why I love the topic. This is why I wrote my last book, Where Was It Before the Dream? Because it is an answer to that question of where does a new idea come from? Well, it's literally like that proof that is given to the younger self by the older self. And it doesn't come from it literally comes from nowhere, in the sense that there is nowhere in the history of an idea where somebody actually did the work of solving a problem. It just literally is given to your younger self by your older self. And that's
plagiarism of the future.
Plagiarism of the future. So this is the time loop at the heart of creativity, I think. And it's literally creation ex nihilo. So it's literally we're gods. Okay, creators are gods because they're creating from literally nothing. There is literally nowhere in the history of an idea that some little imp is hammering it together, or putting it together. Nowhere that your brain is piecing together things and creating a new thing. It's receiving it as a gift from its future self.
You are the muse of yourself.
Yeah.
When I'm having good ideas now, I find myself thanking my future self.
Yes.
I appreciate that. That's great. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that driving some of your work?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. 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 I think it's an inspiring way of thinking about art and creativity, but about, just creative solutions in general. I think that's what's happening. It's easier to show with art. Because you have an artwork that then is something like a dream journal that you can then compare to a later event or whatever in a person's life. It's a little harder with things like inventions and scientific theories and stuff like that. They just are not as amenable to that kind of confirmation process and that kind of comparing with a person's biography. But I think that's what innovation really is bootstrapping.
What do you think's happening with flow state and sort of unconscious behavior?
Yeah, that's a flow state is when you are cooking, in terms of that bootstrapping.
That's your future self just kind of giving...
Flowing into flowing unimpeded. Yeah, I mean, anyone who... And it's... Yeah, and it goes beyond creativity. Like anyone who's doing some skilled activity, a martial artist or a jet fighter pilot or a brain surgeon, they're in a zone.
Yes.
They are not thinking about their free will. This is another reason I tell people, stop worrying about free will. Your best self always comes out when you're not thinking deliberately about your will.
Every time.
Exerting your will. Your best self is that in the zone when you are a machine. You're part of a machine, and you're part of what I think of as a sort of four-dimensional machine. That's like, cycling through time as well as space. It's that's what the Zen. It's a Zen thing. The Zen masters are all about finding that state where you are not freely willed. You are doing what must be done, and
I'm going to go off script a little bit because something just occurred to me as you're saying this is, as a martial artist, as a performer, and sitting here in this room, when things are moving well, it's very automatic, but I will find myself with a second dialogue, almost observing. Mm-hmm. It's happened here a couple of times today, mm-hmm. where I'm just sort of observing, oh, that was a great question. Oh, this is really interesting. It's going well, that sort of mm-hmm. thing. Or if you're performing, you're doing stand-up, you're like, oh, the audience is kind of rough up tonight. Let's try this material. What do you think is going on in the mind when we've got these split monologues?
It's a great question. I come back to, it's an idea that I talk about in Time Loops a bit called Libet's Golem. Benjamin Libet was a neuroscience researcher.
Terrifying research.
Terrifying research about how, we're out of sync with reality.
We may have to describe his experiments.
But that would be fine. But the thing is, the upshot, I think, of his research is that we are actually pulling our meat puppet strings from the future, and that those moments that you're describing, like I'm a martial artist too. You have those moments where you kind of mentally replay something really great that you just did. Well, what if that's your freely willed self pulling your meat puppet strings in the past? What if that's where your free will is being exerted, is on your past behavior? That's, again, how do we prove that? I don't know. But it's a real thing.
It exists. Whether we want to prove it or not, it happens to people in flow state. Even when you're sinking a bunch of baskets, something's going on.
Yeah, totally. And talk to psychics. Remote viewers go into that state too when they're cooking.
What do you think remote viewers, are they remembering the future as remote viewers?
This is a big debate. There's a big debate in the field. I mean, I think that's a hypothesis that needs to be tested, and no one's testing it.
Well, I saw you criticize Pat Price. Well, I'm a huge Pat Price fan. And when you kind of described what Pat was doing, it made a lot of sense to me. Because remote viewers are wrong more than they're right. Mm-hmm. But when they're right, they're definitely right.
Yeah.
So they're just remembering they were right.
That's the hypothesis that needs to be falsified.
Right.
Before we assume that remote viewing is actually, sending your consciousness across space to some other location or to some target, it needs to be falsified that you're not previewing or pre-remembering the feedback you're going to get afterwards.
True.
And this is, some very small experiments have been done to try and test this, but not on any scale. And I always tell remote viewers, unfortunately, I'm not an experimental, parapsychologist. I don't have the setup to study this myself, but I think someone who has the means should set up experiments where and unfortunately, these kinds of experiments are the kinds that would be done in any psychology laboratory where you have to deceive your subject. And I think that's why these experiments don't happen, because
they're happening. We're just, Stargate never ended, I don't think.
Right. But are these experiments that would falsify the precognition hypothesis?
They're probably not focused on it.
I don't know.
Did you remote view your wife's shoes?
I did not remote view my wife's shoes. I precognized being on the floor hunting for an Advil that had dropped among my wife's shoes. Yeah.
So remote viewing.
But I'm saying it's an open question, and
Sure.
I put it out there because no one else is voicing it, and I think it's really something that the field needs to address.
Well, that's why I asked you.
Forward.
It's because when I read your work, I put it down and I just like, oh shit, I hadn't considered. That's why I ask you these. I ask you questions. Maybe it's not even your field, but you're here, so might as well pick the brain.
Yeah, but it's remote viewers will get understandably touchy about it because I mean, it's important. It feels it's validating of a certain belief system that about consciousness and so on, that it leaves the body and so on. And I get it. People don't want cold water thrown on that. And I'm saying, look, this is you. If you're going to really believe that, you need to test it. That's the point of being a materialist scientist, which is, really testing rigorously and taking the most reductive version of a story and seeing if that reductive version can explain the results. And maybe it can't. I'm open that maybe there is, more remote viewing than precognition. I've certainly talked to people who are very convinced that that's the case. But it needs to be done in the context of studies that are published where you can look at the evidence.
And hard to get that published.
It's hard to, yeah, it is.
Probably not an accident that Jacques Vallée was hanging around SRI in the 70s, no? Probably not an accident.
Probably not an accident. And he was like one of the first people to raise this possibility, by the way. I mean, it's in his journals. Like he had lunch, this was 1978, I think, with the SRI guys, said like, how do you guys know this isn't precognition? You're treating this all like this is clairvoyance, and this could be all precognition. And he was very early on that kind of bandwagon that this may be precognition.
Has Vallée addressed the microtubules and Penrose Hameroff work yet?
Not that I'm aware of.
Where do you stand on that quantum process?
I'm very much in favor of Hameroff's work.
The anesthesiologist side.
Yeah, like microtubules. I think microtubules could be the answer. I am not personally that interested in the question of consciousness.
You're not?
No, I think it's a red herring. I think if something's going to come out of this search for consciousness, it's going to be a sort of serendipitous discovery of the mechanisms underlying precognition, and I think that's where the significance of microtubules is. So we were talking about memories being consolidated.
Yep.
Okay. So guess what it is in neurons that reshape the synapses every night when you're dreaming and creating new memories?
Microtubules.
Yep. So if these microtubules are the little quantum computers that are pre-sponding to their own future states, it makes perfect sense. It really creates a perfect little hypothesis for how precognition works. So I think there, and microtubules aren't the only structures in cells that seem to have quantum computing properties, but that's what I think is the significance of microtubules. I'm not convinced by any of the explanations for consciousness, and I'm not convinced by Hameroff and Penrose's theory that it's
Are you not interested in it?
I'm not really. I think consciousness is, people are being premature in thinking that we can get to the heart of what consciousness is, because there are really good arguments to be made that consciousness is an illusion.
You'll never get a satisfactory answer.
No, you're never going to get, and that's the other thing. No physical explanation of consciousness is ever going to satisfy anybody. And I've read a lot of them. I find a lot of different physicalist interpretations of consciousness interesting. This is illuminating, but this is not the ultimate answer. Likewise, I find non-physicalist interpretations of consciousness interesting, but none of them are satisfying. None of the stories about consciousness are satisfying, and I think that suggests that consciousness is not a problem that can be solved right now, or we're using the wrong terms.
Where are you on the soul then, and life after death? And our death is just waiting for us, right? We're being pulled toward it.
Well, we're being pulled towards our survival. See, I think we're being pulled towards survival. I think that's how precognition, that's how time loops work in the life of an organism. We're being drawn generally towards our survival.
I watched you describe anxiety this way now that you mention it.
Yeah, I think anxiety could be a signal
That
of our future withstanding of challenges and threats. That if precognition is drawing us towards an existing future, then it can't be drawing us towards a fan of possible futures. So it's drawing us towards a single future in which we are experiencing our survival of something. You're not going to experience your survival if there hasn't been a challenge to your survival, if there hasn't been a threat there. So we're not going to precognize a future that's all roses and all good things and nothing bad ever happening. Nor are we generally going to precognize hitting the brick wall of death. We're going to precognize close calls. And guess what? That's what people often have precognitive dreams about.
Certainly.
Is close calls. Things, situations in which we say, wow, that sucked, but it could have been worse. That is the basic thought, I think, at the heart of most precognitive dreams is, but I survived. And we could be talking about something as trivial as the sink backing up or something like, it's just really minor threats and upheavals, but little things, challenges that happen or things that challenge our security in one way or another, our peace of mind, things that challenge our peace of mind. But I'm still standing.
Well, when people say, why do we want to watch a train wreck? That's why.
That's why. That's exactly it. Why were we so glued to CNN on the morning of 9/11?
Because it wasn't us.
Because it wasn't us. Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's that great, it's supposedly an Aristotle quote. I don't know if it actually appears in Aristotle, but luck is when the guy next to you gets hit with an arrow. And that's a very interesting thought because it's not luck is when nobody gets hit with an arrow.
Right.
It's when the guy next to us. And the thing is, it's not because we're bad people and we wish harm on other people. It's not that. No. That would be kind of Freud's kind of dark view of human nature. The point is, it's pure semiotics. You can't have a signal, X signal, without that contrastive signal. So you can't have the I survived. You can't have I survived without something representing the possibility of not surviving. And that's, I think, accounts for people's fascination with disasters and death. It's not that we're bad people or we're excited by that. It's that there, on some basic reptilian, we started talking about reptiles, on some basic reptile level, we like that message, but I survived. And
you look at sunflowers sometimes and you're like, I get you. I get you. Well, what happens after we die? Where is our consciousness?
That's out of my lane. I don't know. You
don't have any feelings? We're allowed to speculate.
I don't. Okay, so
if you're not sure, give them
intellectually. Something. I would say, well, I think death is probably the end. But the thing is, I don't think it's possible to really believe that. I don't think it's possible. I think we all, deep down, believe in.
Whether we say it or not.
Whether we say it or not, we all believe in God and we all believe in the afterlife.
Agreed.
And we cannot help but believe that. So I can sit here and intellectually say why I don't, I haven't seen evidence that convinces me otherwise, but deep down, of course I believe.
Sure.
But it doesn't, I genuinely have not seen convincing evidence that we precognize things that we don't survive to learn about. But that is an interesting question. There are a tiny handful of precognition cases that seem to be about things that happened after a person's death. A tiny handful. Edgar Allan Poe, his story, something about Gordon Pym, I forget the story, but like he has this story about these four people in a lifeboat who three people who cannibalized the fourth person in the lifeboat and has the names. And then after his death, decades after his death, there was a real case with those exact names, and they cannibalized some of the people in the lifeboat.
That was in my synchronicity episode. I got it wrong.
Right.
It was a time loop.
Yeah. Well, that would not fit my model.
It wouldn't.
Right. But
why not?
Because it was after his death.
Oh, right. He couldn't pre-remember it.
Right. On the other hand, coincidences do happen.
They do.
They are part of the universe. And by that argument of the law of large numbers, which is what debunkers throw at this problem all the time, they're wrong to do that. But nevertheless, it is real that coincidences happen. And those names were common at the time. And cannibalism at sea was actually surprisingly common. So you can make the argument that that was pure coincidence, but that just validates my favorite theory,
right? How do you know what to throw away when you're going through the stories? Like, that's probably not it.
Well, you've got to. This is a problem. Nobody's objective completely, and this is why science is so important, because science is a collective enterprise of throwing away people's pet theories and individual biases and seeing what the evidence really shows. So, you've got to have that attitude. That's skepticism. And I will say I've been led to a theory of precognition based on evidence, from a place of not at all believing, in anything like precognition, based on the evidence of my own experience, correlated with other people's experience, correlated with, scientific findings, correlated with the plausibility of a physics that explains it, putting a lot of pieces together. But will I be objective in tossing out a certain piece of evidence that doesn't fit my theory? I mean, the thing is, I don't know of any other cases like that Gordon Pym one.
Right.
There aren't a lot.
You tell yourself you would be objective,
yeah,
but it'd make a great story. Maybe we'll keep it in. What was that spark for someone who's trained as a cultural anthropologist working in science?
What was that?
What was that spark that made you go time loop? That because it seems so far out of your field. Was it a culmination?
It was a culmination.
It was
of yeah.
Reading Philip
and it's it's like the different pieces of the argument have all been made by other people. I'm just assembling what I'll name Igor Novikov, who's he is a Russian physicist who he was the one that really debunked. For physics, he debunked the grandfather paradox idea that you could have paradoxes caused by time travel. I mean, he's the one who really, said, no, you're thinking about this wrong. Any time you go back in time and have an effect in time, that's part of the backstory of the present, and that, including your journey through time. So he basically was articulating something like a time loop or bootstrap paradox. In fact, his term for bootstrapping is jinn. The jinn, they're the mythological creatures in Islamic mythology that just appear out of nothing. He called them jinn, and this was in the context of writing about wormholes and how you might have an effect arising from traveling through a wormhole where something arises literally from nothing. So this was, Igor Novikov was writing about this in the 90s. All these ideas have been floated before.
So arriving from nothing reminds me of something else you talked about. This is how we know we're kind of toward the end, is because now I'm off script. I'm just asking my questions. Orbs appearing from nowhere, orbs splitting apart.
Yes, that's what I talk about in Becoming Time-Faring.
So what are we seeing there?
I don't know, but that behavior of objects appearing from nothing and splitting into two, or merging and disappearing, which you get in some reports of UFOs.
You do.
That is consistent with a single object reversing its course in time.
How does that work?
Well, an object, say you have a time ship. Let's say you have an orb time ship. You're sitting in your orb and you pull a lever to reverse your temporal direction and travel back in time. What that's going to look like to you on the inside, you're going to pull that lever and suddenly the external world, this is presuming you could see outside there are a lot of problems with this, but you're going to look like when you pull that lever, suddenly everything outside your ship is going to look like it's a film in reverse. Okay. Everything's going to look
like an H.G. Wells story.
It's going to look, well, H.G. Wells in his story mainly went to the future. He didn't really talk about,
but he talked about how he watched things happening.
Yeah. But in this case, if you pull the lever, say you're in your orb time ship and you're in ordinary time and you pull the lever to go into reverse, you throw it into reverse. Okay. Suddenly everything outside your ship is going to look like it's in reverse and you're going to see history happening backwards. Okay. Like a film on rewind. Okay.
Yep.
From an outside perspective, the outside observer, what they're going to see is two time ships, identical time ships converging and disappearing.
Yes.
That's what it's going to look like to an outside observer. And likewise, say you're enjoying the sort of the history rewinding for a while. Like, I'm going to throw it back into forward. You pull the lever again. What that's going to look like is two time ships emerging from nothing and traveling apart. So an outside observer would see like that. So that S-shaped movement would look like an object over here, two objects splitting over here, and these two objects merging and disappearing, and that other object flying off. That's what it would look like. I worked this out for myself using flip books.
Flip books?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wish I'd brought them. Actually, they're. I was sort of mentally going through like, what would this look like? And so my animation skills aren't great. Although actually I wound up doing little stop motion animations on my website. You can find out on my website for some of the stuff I talk about in that book. But I worked this out in flip books using little orbs in flip books and like what it would look like. And it's like really trippy to what this visual effect is. And it is consistent with some descriptions of UFO behavior. And so that's where why I support Mike Masters, or at least the plausibility of his hypothesis that again, I'm less interested in the anthropological part of it, but in the behavior of these objects, there is all kinds of reasons to think that they are manipulating time. And that's one of them, that they could be actually reversing their course in time. They could be actually physically traveling backward in time.
What about when we see more than two?
You could have a single object that reverses its course multiple times, and the time stream would look for that duration of time like a swarm of objects.
We see that. We see
swarms. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the example I use in the book is apparently Werner von Braun. Now, he wasn't there to see it. He wasn't at the Trinity test. But apparently, he wrote in his diary that people at the Trinity test reported seeing swarms of objects.
A lot of tests, we've seen this.
Yeah. And, what if it was a single object, single guy in a time ship, wanting to get multiple vantage points on this event and scrub it back and forth, like you were looking at
scrubbing a timeline
back and forth.
Wow.
What it would look like to an outside observer is a swarm of objects.
And why are they moving the same way? Because it's the same ship.
It's the same ship.
Yeah, scrubbing a timeline.
Yeah.
Okay, blew my mind again.
So yeah, I wish I'd brought those flip books because it.
If you have them online, we'll throw.
Yeah, I have them online. There's a website. I did little. My daughter helped me make little like stop motion animations of flying saucers merging and stuff like that. So,
what are we missing out of time faring that we should cover? I mean, I think I could throw all my stuff. I'll talk to you for hours.
Just the don't get hung up on grandfather paradoxes. These hang-ups that people have about about time and time travel, they're totally false. They're myths. And the thing is, they're falsehoods that have been promoted by some of the greatest minds of our time, like Stephen Hawking.
Yes.
Thought that time travel was impossible because it would lead to paradoxes. But the whole first chapter of my book is why that's a complete nothing burger. There's time travel does not lead to paradox.
If you get on board with that and block universe and delayed choice, everything just seems to make sense now. Everything just seems to fall right elegantly, perfectly. Yeah, everyone needs to read your books for sure. What else did we miss, Eric?
I don't know. We covered a lot.
Where should they go? Where do you want them to go? The nightshirt? If you're into sci-fi, the nightshirt.
Yeah, I don't really contribute. I mean, I don't have time to blog anymore. I'm on, lately I've been putting some things on my Substack. It's also the nightshirt. They can find my books on my website, ericwargo.com. And, they're all on Amazon.
And nobody should follow you on Twitter, right? Let's not
I'm on
it.
Twitter. I don't really post that much on Twitter anymore. I had a great following a few years ago, and then when Twitter changed, I lost.
You did?
Yeah, had a good engagement. I had a good audience on Twitter, and then half the people left Twitter, and then half the people stopped posting, and it became kind of a hell site. But I'm still there.
Okay.
And they can interact with me there. They can DM me or whatever.
Well, I definitely want to check out your Substack. I didn't know you were doing that. The nightshirt was mostly the way I prepared for this conversation. But talk about a rabbit hole. So fascinating. That stuff is evergreen, by the way. Doesn't matter that you haven't posted in a while. Well,
actually, I've started on my Substack. I've been reposting a few of the older articles that I really liked on the nightshirt that no one sees anymore. I reposted those on the Substack.
I'd love to see you go back to those old ones with new commentary, things that you've learned through your writing.
Well, that's what I did. I sort of rewrote those pieces and added to them and so on. But yeah.
All right. Dr. Eric Wargo, huge influence on this channel and my storytelling. Thank you so much. This has been great.
This has been really fun. Really fun.
You'll come in for every book.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.
So here's what checks out about Eric's work. His PhD is from Emory University. He worked as an editor for psychology organizations for years. The block universe theory is real. It comes directly from Einstein's special relativity. Hermann Minkowski formalized it in 1907. Now that's the idea that the past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. And most physicists accept this. It's not fringe science. Now let's talk about Daryl Bem's experiments. This is where things get interesting. In 2011, Bem published 9 experiments showing precognition effects. Students chose which curtain hid erotic images before the computer even generated them. Memory tests where future studying improved past performance. The results were statistically significant. And here's what most people don't know. Bem's work has been replicated. A 2015 meta-analysis found 90 independent experiments. Many showed the same effects. The replication crisis you hear about is focusing on failed attempts by skeptics. But successful replications do exist. I just had to bring that up just to keep us honest. Now, the quantum physics part, that's real too. Wheeler's delayed choice experiments, I've talked about that a million times. The quantum eraser studies. These show measurement choices can retroactively affect past events. Quantum computing researchers are now working on something called indefinite causal order. Computations where cause and effect run backwards. I know. And Eric's personal stories are compelling. His 26-year precognitive dream, the calendrical resonance patterns, artists like Michael Richards sculpting himself being pierced by airplanes before dying in the Twin Towers, David Mandel dreaming about the towers collapsing exactly 5 years before 9/11. These cases are documented. And I keep coming back to Jung's scarab story. The patient dreams of receiving a scarab beetle. The next day, Jung hears tapping on his window, a beetle. He catches it and hands it to her. Eric calls this a time loop, not synchronicity. The dream caused her to tell Jung, which caused him to notice the beetle, which caused the dream in the first place. It's a closed causal loop. This connects to a lot of topics I've covered on the channel. The episode about synchronicities touched exactly on these patterns. The time travel episodes, from Project Pegasus to John Titor, even the CIA's Gateway Process research, they're all exploring the same fundamental question. Does consciousness transcend linear time? I don't know. Eric's work is thoughtful. He's not rejecting materialism or mainstream science. He's arguing for a paradigm shift within it. The future might not be fixed, but it might be influencing the present in ways we don't understand. His books are great. Time Loops and Precognitive Dream Work and The Long Self. You can find them on Amazon. And check out his blog, which is super interesting, especially if you're into sci-fi. It's called The Night Shirt. We'll link all this stuff below. Eric brings serious academic credentials to these questions, and that matters in a field full of speculation. Now, thanks to scientists like Eric, we might eventually get some answers to what are probably the most important questions ever posed. I thought I had more, but I guess not. Until next time, be safe. We're having fun, right? Be safe, be kind, and know that you are appreciated.
In Area 51, a secret code inside the Bible said I would. I love my UFOs and paranormal fun, as well as music, so I'm singing it like I should. But then another conspiracy theory becomes the truth, my friends, and it never ends. No, it never ends. I feel the crap I got stuck inside Mel's hole with MK Ultra of being only too aware. Did Stanley Kubrick fake the moon landing alone on a film set, or were the shadow people there? The Roswell aliens just fought the smiling man, I'm told, and his name was Cold. And I can't believe I'm dancing with the fishes. Hecklefish on Thursday nights with AJ2, and Wi-Fi's helping me all through the night. All I ever wanted was to just hear the truth, so the Wi-Fi's on repeat all through the night. The Mothman sightings and the solar storm still come to Agatha, the secret city underground. Mysterious number stations, planet Serpo 2, Project Stargate, and what the Dark Watchers found. We're in a simulation, don't you worry though.